in our unique and remarkable democracy. Among them will be millions of first-time voters. The youngest of them were born in 2008. As they stand in that polling booth, they will think about what matters to them. When I speak to the new generation of young people today, I see that same vision for a better future, that same burning desire to build something better, that same belief that in a world of uncertainty, and that is what we have to do together. It is the moment to show them that we can build a continent where you can be who you are, love who you want, aim as high as you want, a continent that is united in freedom and peace. This is Europe's moment to answer the call of history. Long live. Our Team Europe approach has enabled us to be more strategic, more assertive, and more united. We want to lead efforts to make the rules-based order fairer and make distribution more fair. This will also be working with new and old partners to strengthen our cooperation. Just last week, when I was in Delhi, we signed, I think, the most ambitious project of our generation, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. These are state-of-the-art connections for the world of tomorrow, faster, shorter, cleaner. These are investments in our partners' economies, their investment in Europe's prosperity and security in a fast-changing world.
poslední úvěr ve výši 790 milionů euro nám vlastně pomůže zainvestovat v následujících několika letech právě do toho, abychom byli schopni naši distribuci připravit na výzvy budoucnosti, to znamená na instalace obnovitelných zdrojů ve velkém měřítku.
Evropská investiční banka je pro nás opravdu stabilní partner. Projekty, které jsme uskutečnili a pravděpodobně by se možná ani nerealizovaly, kdybychom nespolupracovali s EIB, tak jsou například vybudování nemocnice následné péče v Moravské Třebové, což je záležitost unikátní, protože v České republice se nejvíce investuje do nemocnic akutní péče, urgentních, a toto je nemocnice doléčovací.
Děkuji EIB za to, že nám pomohla s financováním lokomotiv Trax MS3, to znamená, jsou to více systémové moderní lokomotivy. Tím, že jsou to nejnovější lokomotivy v Evropě, tak mají dokonce sníženou spotřebu o 5 až 7%. Spotřebu elektrické energie, to znamená, že jsou nejenom zelené, ale jsou vlastně ultrazelené, protože jsou vlastně efektivnější než jiné elektrické lokomotivy.
My pracujeme se společnostmi tak, že z jejich plastů jim děláme jejich produkt, takzvaná cirkulární ekonomika. Investice více jak 1 milion euro byla pro nás předtím neuchopitelná. Takže my jsme za to rádi, posunuli nás to někam dál. Dovolili jsme si koupit zařízení, které jsou sofistikovanější, které nám umožní lépe zpracovat
Nová linka medzi SGEF a EIB má podporiť projekty, ktoré doteraz neboli financovateľné, tak na našej strane ako na strane EIB. To sú projekty z oblasti inovácie, zelených investícií.
Tohle je nádherná tělocvična, která vznikla právě z peněz Evropské investiční banky, ale nejenom tělocvična. Pak to jsou projekty dopravní infrastruktury, pak to jsou také projekty v oblasti sociálních služeb, pak to jsou třeba projekty, a to je asi největší část těchto peněz od Evropské investiční banky, které putují do nemocnic. Ta spolupráce s Evropskou investiční bankou určitě zlepšuje životy lidí, protože my bychom neměli takový velký objem finančních prostředků, které potřebujeme vložit do projektu.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, dear guests. Welcome at the second day of the 9th edition of Prague European Summit. It's my pleasure to be with you today as well as yesterday during the whole afternoon. My name is Aneta Zachová and I'm Editor-in-Chief of Euractiv Czech Republic and also coordinator of this year's Prague European Summit program and main moderator of today's event. The same issue as yesterday. This European Summit is dedicated to the topic of resilience. We also named this edition as Reshaping Europe towards greater resilience amid global crisis. During the second day of summit, we will also engage in panel discussion in European chats, and also we will discuss within closed roundtable debates. And all our discussions will be around three main topics. The first one, economic resilience, the second, political resilience, and the third, forward resilience. Let me also point out that this event is co-organized by two leading Czech think tanks, the Institute of International Relations and the European Institute for European Policy. And this event is co-organized with institutional partners, the Office of the Government of the Czech Republic, representation of the European Commission in the Czech Republic, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, Hans Seidel Stiftung, European Investment Bank, and City of Prague. We would also like to thank to our main partners, Mercedes-Benz Praha and Institut Français, for their support, as well to our other partners. Regarding today's programs, we will start with opening words, then we will continue with plenary discussion on twin transition, and we will continue with economic topics also after that. At 11 o'clock, we will have closed roundtable discussion for those who were invited about net zero as the next industrial revolution. At 11:10, we will gather also here to discuss the new EU tools to support recovery of European economy and also the twin transition. Then we will continue with lunch, and after lunch break, we will welcome here again the Vice President of the European Commission, Věra Jourová, with participants of this year's Future European Leaders Forum. At the end of today's program, we will finish our discussions with the role of medium and small-sized state. We will also discuss EU elections and also EU reform and enlargement. So you can see there are many topics for today, so I hope that we will all enjoy fruitful discussions. And before we start with the first panel, I would like to invite here to the stage Mats Braun, Director of Institute of International Relations, for his opening words. So please welcome Mr. Braun.
Thank you very much, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here again for the third day of our conference. the topic of this conference is reshaping Europe towards greater resilience amid global crisis. We spoke a lot about the future of Europe yesterday. Reshaping Europe is, of course, a word, a term, which can include several different aspects. During yesterday's debate and also during during the Tuesday session, we focused largely on the war, Russia's war against Ukraine, which I think is something that we all understand, since sadly enough, this war is a defining moment for Europe and for the future shape it will take. There was a quite heated discussion yesterday as well regarding the European Union as an actor, if the European Union is turning into a geopolitical actor or not. I think one of the aspects of that discussion is that I think many of us think of different things when we think of the European Union as a geopolitical actor. But it's about the concept itself, geopolitics, which can take very different meanings. I think if we go to the world of academia, the only thing everyone would really agree to is that geopolitics stresses the role of geography and stresses the role of power. And then there are many things you can add to that, leading to very different understandings of what we mean when we refer to the European Union as a geopolitical actor or not so. Today we will start with two panels that highlight economic challenges and the twin transformation the European Union is going through, referring to digitalization, climate change. And I think the main question here is how to achieve sustainable development. And I think as a beginning here, it is good to remember that what that term actually means. What does it mean to strive for sustainable development? We can go back to the 1980s and the report by the so-called Brundtland Commission, the commission headed by the former Norwegian Prime Minister Gro Harlem Brundtland, and that United Nations Commission defined sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. I just think this is good to keep in mind while we discuss the twin transformations and economic challenges. Of course, the existential challenge, global one, is linked to climate change, the climate crisis. Now, in difference to the military security threats to the European Union we discussed yesterday, the climate crisis is actually one where the European Union is fairly good equipped to deal with it, at least in the sense that the European Union was quick to come up with a desire to be a leader, a global leader, on mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, to mitigate the climate change. And it's quite well equipped because it could do so by by setting up ambitious targets and then rely on regulations in order to deliver. And the European Union might not be good at being a geopolitical actor by now. We can discuss that. But I think most agree it's quite an efficient regulatory power. And in that sense, it has had quite a good starting point, and perhaps for that reason also selected climate as an area where it wanted to be ambitious and take a leading role in the world. And if we want to be optimistic here, we can say that so far the European Union has been successful in delivering on its goals when it comes to the Kyoto Protocol targets of the European Union, when it comes to the targets later set for 2020, including the work within the European Union's climate and energy package, which was provided in 2008-2009. The question now is, of course, will the European Union be able to reach its ambitious targets for 2030 and 2050? That includes the reduction of emissions by 55% by 2030 and actually reaching the goal of carbon neutrality by the year 2050. Skeptics would say that the European Union and others thus far has mainly collected so-called low-hanging fruits, innovations, reductions of emissions done through technological innovation with some help of economic crisis. And the question is, will we be able to reach that ambitious goal of 55% by 2030, and even more so, the goal of carbon neutrality by 2050? We have one European chat today as well devoted to the European elections. And when we speak about this climate agenda, the main task probably might be to find a consensus in the society about these measures, find the support for taking measures. And elections, of course, will be crucial for how this path will further develop. Not only the elections to the European Parliament, obviously, also, and perhaps even more importantly, many of the national elections. Well, to conclude here, we are, as was discussed several times yesterday as well, living in times of big changes, and the European Union has an ambitious agenda ahead of it. I will end by asking a question: if how many of you believe that the European Union in year 2030 will have 36 member states and has managed to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 55% compared to the year of 1990? Of course, you don't know if you should answer this question or not, and we are a little bit too big group to have a discussion here. I will leave it as a question to think about. My own answer would be, it would be very difficult, but not impossible. So let's see what the future will bring us. Okay, I think it's time to open up for the first panel discussion of today's conference. I'm very happy to see all of you here, and I'm looking forward to listening to all the great speakers we have in the program for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown, for your welcoming speech. And as you said, we are ready to start our first panel discussion of today's conference. As was said already, our first topic is the twin transition as the driving force of Europe's competitive and sustainable economy. And our stage is already ready to welcome the first speakers, Matthias Koch, Chris Skidmore and Linda Zelina-Cross, and also the moderator of this panel discussion, Kostis Geropoulos from any global media. So I would like to ask our speakers and the moderator to take the seats. Now, let me just pass the floor to the moderator, Kostis Geropoulos. Enjoy the discussion.
Hello and welcome. Thanks so much for joining us again this year. It's my third time at the Prague European Summit. And we're starting this discussion today with talking about the twin transitions as a driving force of Europe's competitive and sustainable economy. We're going to be discussing the huge and largely untapped opportunity for technology and data to drive sustainability goals, energy transition as an investment opportunity, and to boost sustainability. We have a very I have a very distinct panel here today. We're going to be discussing mostly the market efforts to strengthen competitiveness and sustainability in the local economy, the resilience of cross-border supply chains, ensuring that they run smoothly, and also the importance of critical raw materials in those supply chains. As industries gear up for twin transformations, it's very important to have a twin digital green transition and meet the vital needs for the European labor market. I'm going to start with introducing my panel. I have Matthias Koch. He's a senior policy advisor from the Austrian Federal Economic Chamber, Strategic Capital Networking. Chris Skidmore, he's a member of Parliament of the United Kingdom and the chair of Net Zero Review and former energy minister and Net Zero Czar. And Linda Zelina Cross, CEO and founder of International Sustainable Finance Center. And Matthias, the floor is yours for like a really short presentation, and then we can go on. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I can start with it because I would say you're about politics, you're about financing, and I'm a bit of a reality check representing the Austrian economy, not just the Austrian economy, the European economy, with this strategic capital networking scheme. What I wanted to say, coming to Prague and looking at this beautiful city and knowing this place under the communist time, it was difficult to get there, but it wasn't obviously impossible. So let's dream about our targets in the future. We don't have that much time because time passes very fast, which is extremely important from our point of view. The goals are that they are there beyond any discussion. We need these goals and we are very much behind these targets, but it's very difficult if we formulate targets and also, I mean, everything is put into law and directives and regulatories, and if we don't even know how to get there. And this is the tricky thing. I mean, if for example, the technologies are ideologically discussed and not openly, then we get really very much into trouble because, let's face it, we are talking about a horizon of a few decades and many, many years, and we need the innovative aspect. Without innovation, we won't get anywhere. And this is exactly what is our main message coming from the business representation, because we would say the economy shouldn't be the problem, they should be part of the solution. And for this we need freedom and we need the environment to be able to be also to be innovative. What I would like, if we talk about these challenges, then I would like to also talk about it's very difficult to separate these pillars. If you talk about the green transition, about the digital transition, then of course we have to talk about the social dimension of the transition. I mean, we could find many aspects. What we shouldn't forget is the holistic approach. We live in a time with lots of challenges and we have to combine the challenges. And I would say surely the digital transition is part of the solution of the green transition and vice versa. If we stay within one track, then we see maybe more the problems than the solutions, because the solutions come often from a different angle. And this is also something we would like to put more focus on. The Austrian Chamber of Economics has established, and I'm very happy that this is part of my job, has established a lobbying scheme which is called the capital networking. Why do I mention this in this context? Because it's planned or it's seen like a self-helping group. We have to deal with all these challenges, and also we have to deal, the businesses have to deal, and our experts have to deal with many very complicated EU directives and regulatory proposals. And you can maybe see it that way, that in all European capitals you have to deal Unfortunately, in London, the case is a bit different, but maybe we get some ideas of best practices or how things could be done better in a better way. Because sometimes competition isn't that bad, especially on a regulatory field. But let's put it that way, that in the European capitals, we get these proposals at the same time in every European capital, and everybody starts writing with their own perspective. And if we start talking, it's too late, because one has put these priorities, the others have put other priorities. And this would be my last sentence, and it's just introduction. I'm very much looking forward to an interesting discussion. The idea of this capital networking scheme is how we can deal with these challenges, the green transition and also the digital transition, all the transitions with all the implications we have to face. And the idea is that in Prague, everybody knows everybody. In Vienna, everybody knows everybody. In London, everybody knows everybody. In Brussels, everybody knows everybody. But between London, Vienna, Prague, and Madrid, you name it, we don't know each other that well. And this is exactly the gap where, how should I say, maybe accidents happen, like with the traffic situation. Thank you very much, and I'm very much looking forward to a fruitful discussion.
Thanks so much, Matthias, and I'm looking forward later in the discussion to know more about the challenges that the European Federal Economic Chamber is facing, and also about what kind of synergies we can see in digital and sustainable innovation. Chris, also for an opening statement. Thanks.
Oh, thank you very much, and thank you for the kind introduction. I was the UK's energy minister 4 years ago that had the opportunity of signing the UK's commitment to net zero by 2050 into law. We have a Climate Change Act which sets out sort of carbon budgets. We have a committee on climate change, an independent committee that advises obviously how these budgets work. And I understand there are other European countries that don't necessarily have that legislative and regulatory framework. But that's not to say that we shouldn't sort of seek to make this shared commitment a reality. Namely because we are now living in a world where there is no economy except a green economy. And I had an opportunity to come back and produce a report that came out in January called Mission Zero. It was a net zero review of how we could do net zero, how we could achieve our climate commitments in a way that was both affordable and efficient and was pro-business and pro-growth. Because the UK still leads the G20 in having successfully decarbonised by 50% on 1990 levels of carbon dioxide emissions, and at the same time having grown its economy by 70%. And it's that economic model of clean growth that I think is so important for Western democratic nations to promote, to demonstrate that decarbonisation doesn't have to lead to deindustrialisation. And at the same time, we are now in this global net zero race where to delay will actually cost more. And one of the analysis of the report I produced, it was in 2 parts, was that when we look at how to achieve net zero, if we do not make that long-term commitment, that stable commitment, having the consistency, the clarity, the continuity of policy frameworks, taking a long-term based approach, then we will actually not be able to achieve net zero in an affordable way. It just becomes more and more expensive. And actually, I look to European partners such as Germany and France, where they've created these investment opportunities, whether it's the KfW, which pays for itself, or you've got MaPrimeRénov' in France on looking at how to bring in energy efficiency measures. There are now opportunities to look at what other countries are doing and to emulate that. As was mentioned in the first presentation, let's not reinvent the wheel or duplicate. Let's look where we can be efficient ourselves in establishing best practice, in building new means of cooperation and collaboration. For instance, Powering Past Coal Alliance that the UK helped set up with Canada, and now the European countries have joined, making sure that we share not just the challenges and how to tackle those challenges most effectively, but then also the opportunities. And there are going to be significant opportunities coming down the tracks. We see now the introduction of the carbon border adjustment mechanism. We've seen last week Turkey saying that they will now follow a carbon border adjustment mechanism. We are living in revolutionary times where we're on that steep S-curve. And we are in a place now where policymakers are behind the curve, when markets are already moving. Investors are making decisions about where to place future capital investment. And overwhelmingly, that is now in the future industries of green technologies. This year alone, investment in solar equaled that of oil and gas. 10 years ago, oil and gas was 6 times that of solar. And my concern is when we look at trying to protect high carbon industries of the past that obviously for no fault of their own are high carbon, and we've got to work with those communities, with those highly skilled engineers to be able to transition them to new opportunities, to new industries. That if we wait, if we somehow claim that we can protect those jobs for the future by not investing elsewhere, then they will become stranded assets. And communities won't thank us when they realise that policymakers went slow, knowing that what they knew was that the rest of the world's economy was moving towards an entirely different world. And that was the narrative of the Net Zero Review. It's coming out as a book, Mission Zero, ahead of COP28, because I think COP28 is, I think, I'm very hopeful for what will be announced, potentially trebling of renewable power, potentially doubling of energy efficiency measures. And understanding that this new global world is where we are moving to is something that we need to latch onto the fact that net zero, and I know it's difficult because certainly amongst politicians need to get elected, and getting elected means that often you head for the lowest common denominator, and there's a risk obviously that the energy transition ends up in a so-called culture war. But the reality is framing this transition as one that is an opportunity and not a cost is so important. And at the same time, recognizing that yes, we live in remarkable times. We are living through a climate crisis. It's our generation that's going to have to deal with this. But the transition itself is no different from many other transitions that we've gone through in human history, whether that's to go onto gas instead of coal, whether that's to get off horse and carts and move to cars, whether that's to get into electricity. We've been there, we've done that in the past, and we've been able to succeed because it reached a point where the market moved to a point where it was profitable to do so. So basing our decisions in the interest of business, in industry, is where we need to move, and we all need to work together to demonstrate that clear narrative that net zero is an investment and not a cost, and it will make us richer and not poorer.
That's a very good point, that net zero should be an investment, not a cost. And what you mentioned about earlier about decarbonization doesn't necessarily have to lead to industrialization, and to make sure that they're not only shared, the challenges are shared, but also the opportunities. I want to move to my next panelist, Linda. Linda, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think what people forget is that it's all a competition, and countries are in competition for investment and business. So collaboration works really well, and we've seen actually some very positive examples between Czech Republic and the UK. We've seen some between Czech Republic and the US, especially in tech and innovation sector. But what I think sometimes gets forgotten is the bigger picture, and the fact that sustainability actually forces you to try and think longer term. And in this game of who is going to attract most investment, most innovative business, where will actually companies want to expand operations, where you will drive and create next unicorn businesses, well, there's two secular trends that we talk about in finance. You call it mega trends in politics, or something else actually in business. But the issue is that there's actually three. Number one, it is climate change. We will not run away from these massive non-linear effects and extreme weather, etc., etc. And at one point, it will actually affect everyone in terms of food prices, your holidays, your insurance premiums, you name it. And finance is already doing the modeling for that. If you want to see quite a good model, it's the Inevitable Policy Response report that came out in New York in Climate Week. We did have a little bit of a disagreement at the launch event because they hadn't mapped the policies across the CE countries, which I think is a bit of a shame, because that would give us a fuller understanding that actually Europe is not so uniform yet in terms of how much policy leadership there is. Second one is, of course, social, and I'm really glad that Matthias brought it in, because it's been overlooked. And it's also part of the blame should be laid at the door of the green movements because, well, any transition and transformation has losers and winners. And we have to be honest with each other and recognize that we need to rethink parts of the social contract because things will happen and some industries might not survive. They might move somewhere else, or they might need to be so heavily transformed that we need so much investment, and we need to be okay with that, because investment is often, in some of the countries, seen as debt. So it's negative. So how do we change the narrative? Because there's mortgage, for example, from a very basic perspective. Mortgage is the largest debt you'll ever take, in most cases. But we call it mortgage, we don't call it debt. It's an investment for your safer future. So the same should apply to certain sectors of the economy. And the final really big transformation that we're undergoing is digital AI and machine learning. And I don't work on that, but in a different context, I had the pleasure to meet President Obama, and his main message was that that was the thing that he did not realize early enough. Because that is transforming life in ways that we are not yet fully aware of. And it will only accelerate because, well, who doesn't like more efficiency and speed? Before Amazon, people didn't even realize that you could have a same-day delivery. I live in London. The center that I run is placed in Prague, and mostly I'm in Brussels. So here you go. This is the technology actually enables to do that. It actually enables to do different types of business, different types of work, which can drive a lot more productivity, which I think in Europe we really, really need. And my final point would be that what ties it all together? Well, we have two very big issues. Number one is that we still are relatively siloed. So it's actually very nice to have a conversation amongst us coming from very different parts of the system, an NGO, government, and business. And I think more and more of that needs to happen. And some countries are better at it. UK is one of the best. Sweden, I've worked a lot in Sweden, fantastic. Czech Republic still has a lot of work to do. The collaborations are always a bit of a stumbling block. Also, cross-country collaborations are very slow. So most of my work, actually 1 day a week, is dedicated to introducing people to each other. Sounds funny, but you know what? It actually makes magic happen because people discover, oh yes, we have joint interests, we can do projects, we can move the needle somewhere. And then finally, nothing happens without leadership. And this is where we need new types of leadership. In terms of business, I would say that we work on ESG, how popular, right? Environmental, social governance. But governance is the underlying factor of everything, whether it's a country, an NGO, or a business. And here I think we need really good, inspirational leadership. Role models who actually drive the change, that stand behind the transformation that we need, that actually are good storytellers, telling people that, well, if you love picking mushrooms, climate change is important to you. Transformation is important to you. If you like going to the seaside and enjoying your holidays in Croatia, well, this is why it's very important for you to actually be behind transformation. If you like driving, yes, by all means, we need electric vehicles because of the pollution and everything else that this drives. So the point is that we need better storytellers and people who have the courage to stand behind the agenda, because that can actually be transformative in terms of the future of the country. And here I think that the storytelling has been relatively poor, not just in Czech Republic or this region, but actually across the board, because people have been wanting to play it safe. And I think going forward, it's going to be harder and harder to aggregate the population's wishes and values, etc. So the party system's already suffering from this. So we need actually bolder and better, more nuanced storytelling and leadership that is actually able to drive the transformation.
Thanks so much, Linda. We're going to continue on our part of that discussion now, but I want you to think about your questions and also use Slido so I can, if you have any questions, so we can, I can put them on to our speakers. I'm going to start Chris, you mentioned about the, of course, politicians must get re-elected, and sometimes they're doing as little as possible. And that leads to culture wars. How can we succeed on net zero and decarbonization above any kind of these types of culture wars?
So I think when it comes to looking at the political narrative and the elections, I think it's important to recognise there's often more than one set of elections. You mentioned, obviously, the European Parliament sort of elections as one particular sort of forum. In the UK, we've got next year maybe a general election. Everyone's focusing on the date for that. But also we've got May elections where we've got, we had a big shift in our democracy towards regional mayoral government, municipalities. And that's, I think, helping to shift where do we put the burden of responsibility and accountability. And actually my Mission Zero report, one of the missions, as I said, to set out these 10-year missions, because we need to move away from the traditional sort of political cycles. How do we get cross-party buy-in across a range of elections? And actually trying to give metro mayors, as we call them, the powers around decarbonisation is really important. Energy is what we call a reserved power in the UK, so decisions taken by central government. But when it comes to decarbonisation and climate change policy, that's what we call devolved. So Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland get the chance to have their say on that and set their budgets. And equally, we're now looking at places like Birmingham, Manchester, having potential roles and responsibilities to get on decarbonising heat networks and making sure that they can take those shifts. Because if we look, I think, politically at what's happened in the past, remember when Trump pulled out of the Paris Agreement, it led to this movement, we're still in. So all the US mayors sort of came together, and then there was the formation of the C40s, so recognising that cities, half of all the world's population is going to live in cities by 2030, 2050. So we need to really sort of focus on what we can do now. And actually, the C40 is on track. Some of those cities are on track to meet their decarbonisation goals as opposed to the countries themselves. So I think for myself, focusing not just on what central government does is also, yes, they've got to set the legislation and regulation, but making sure there's other forums for elections and that we have other political actors putting pressure on the government of the day is also really important. And I've seen some mayors get elected on net zero tickets. You go up to like Newcastle, the Tees Valley in the north of England, a guy called Ben Houchen is the mayor. He increased his vote by saying net zero is going to lead to new jobs, is going to lead to reindustrialization, and he didn't shy away from it. And people voted for him because he set out, as was mentioned, this narrative, and he made it place-based, he made it real. And I think that's the challenge. You can't see carbon dioxide emissions. You can see job losses, and trying to demonstrate that if you don't do this, you're never going to outcompete China for low-quality steel. But what we can do is create new markets for high-quality steel that aligns with it being low carbon. And how do we take those narratives and make it real for local areas? My report showed that if you take what's called a place-based approach, you can actually achieve net zero at far less cost if you can tailor the solutions city by city, region by region. Some areas are going to have high agricultural footprints, some are going to have high industrial footprints. But making it local is what I think is really important for the future.
Linda, I saw you nodding. How can we avoid those culture wars?
I do like the point that actually democratizing some of these things and making more place-based is definitely a great idea, because it's also how communities react to local leaders who they trust rather than somebody far away. In China, it's the opposite, actually. People believe that the central government is benign. So each country has its own specifics. And I was in Shanghai 2-3 weeks ago, and I think there's a deep misunderstanding in terms of, well, what can we do? We're just small countries or a small region as Europe. Everybody else is polluting. Net zero is never going to happen. It will happen. I worked on Chinese central banking transformation a few years ago with UNEP-FI, which is part of the United Nations. They already have all the blueprints. And in a centralized governance system, it's so much easier to transform like this. They already have, for example, heavy industry vehicles that are completely green. So technological advancement is so much more rapid. So what can we do in Europe? And I think it's a very interesting thing that we actually are leaders in certain things. And since I have the finance hat, I have the pleasure to, of course, always bring in the EU Sustainable Finance Framework. But that's actually, in the next few years, is going to generate big push for digitalization, because all of a sudden you have all this amazing non-financial data, environmental, social, etc. data. It will be in the European single access point. You will be able to do analytics and use it not just for investment and figuring out what's going well or not. It's also a fantastic tool for future policy making. So you can actually start tweaking the system with a lot more data and a lot more precision, which I think is very important. And finally, investors love these kind of stories. If there is a local government or national government that says, this is what we're going to do, this is our vision, this is where we are going to put money or put effort, we will facilitate this, that's investors' dream. And there's so much money, so much institutional money crying out loud, please give us green projects. Give us transformation. We want to finance it. We have nowhere to put this money because we have to report to the asset owners how much of our capital is green or future-proof. And guess what? There's not enough projects. And this is a golden opportunity, just like when we used to argue a few years ago that money is so cheap. Invest it. We had so many discussions with different governments all across the world. I was part of a different consortium of think tanks. And people were like, yes, but you know, we're not so sure. And now money is more expensive. So the point is that the opportunity to invest in green is now. And when you look at even innovation indexes, the latest ones, it's not just enough to be, oh, I'll do it later, because everybody else is already potentially doing it. And you see the change happening very fast, much faster than people expect. It's not about you getting worse, it's about other countries getting a lot better at playing the new game of climate, green tech, etc.
Matthias, your home country is Austria, I mean, what do you see as the main drivers for successful twin transition, both in Austria but also in the EU?
Just a second. The drivers, and sorry, I've got a bit of preparation. What do we see the drivers and the barriers of successful twin transition EU and home country, Austria? I was so much falling into this discussion that I'm a bit surprised to carry on with this. I wanted to say so much about this,
Actually, I was trying to make a transition to, as we're doing the twin transition.
Let's get back to the basics. You're absolutely right, because that's also kind of a reality check whether we're going to achieve or not. Of course, there are drivers and barriers on EU level, on the national level. Of course, I'm more into the Austrian situation, but it's very comparable with other countries, despite countries are different, as we have said before. I mean, the EU taxonomy, the classification system for sustainable technologies and business models, it's very complex. It's not always transparent, and then we have discussions whether power stations can be included or not. That's a very Austrian approach. You see, that's also a kind of a battlefield, and also it depends very much on professional lobbying, so that's also difficult to convince and not to lose the people, the voters. And then, of course, the European Green Deal, which is, as we have said, to put the EU economy until 2050 climate neutral and support the environment. This can be the drivers, but this can also be obstacles how it's done. Let's face the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. It's a French industry invention. You won't believe it. The Austrian industry is very much against it. And we went to Paris through these contacts, and we realized that the French were proposing the CBAM. For us, it's unthinkable because it's really hindering the Austrian export economy. But it comes from La Fabrique de l'Industrie, the French think tank, but it's pretty obvious because they don't depend too much. The French industry doesn't depend that much on the global markets. The Austrian industry depends very much on the global market. So you see, it's very important to know where something comes from. So again, potential or barrier. The Next Generation EU financial instrument for EU members. It's probably the first time that the twin transition was mentioned, the green transition, the digital transition. So the national plans for the RRF, they had to be submitted in Brussels and to be confirmed, and they had at least to describe projects to an amount to 37% affecting the green transformation, and at least 20% of the digital transformation. And thank you very much for mentioning all this public money involved. That's only the first step, because lots of private money is going to follow. And that's why it's very interesting to look at all these projects, the green transition projects of the RRF, because there you can see where the money is going to go for the future. But I don't know if you're aware, and this is also something which is quite interesting, that we don't know that. We talk a lot about the Marshall subsidies of the United States, and which has brought wealth back to Europe. And the next generation, especially only the RRF, who is part of the next generation program, which is even more. Can you imagine that the Marshall Plan between 1948 and 1952 were about 125 billion euro today. But if we look only at the grants of the RRF, then we are talking about 338 billion euro. So we could say that the RRF money provided for the member states by the EU is 6 times higher than the Marshall Plan money. I'm sure not many people know this, and that's quite a shame, talking about the narrative. Yeah? So we live in a very stressful time, but we live also in a time of lots of opportunities. And of course, if you think about how depressing the news are on a daily basis, but there are so many changes for the next decade or the next 20, 30 years, which are much more stable and much more, I would say, the mega trends, so we can trust into the future. Another change is the ETS, which is also very difficult for companies because it's very bureaucratic. Yeah, it's also it's very work intensive. Then the Supply Chain Act, which came from Germany, interesting enough. So it's not only that everything bad comes from Brussels. I mean, that's a question of point of view. I'm advocating for the business sector. But I would say Brussels might be bad, but there's something worse. These are the national member states. And so these are the trends coming from Brussels, which can be good, which can be very problematic. But then let's look at the member states, the part which is worse than Brussels. In Austria, what do we make out of this? I'm not going to mention it because it would be a bore and it would take too much time. But it's extremely bureaucratic. There are so many laws. There are regional laws. There are national laws. What we have made out of the data, the general data protection regulation in Austria, you wouldn't believe it in the Czech Republic because we have had these discussions. So this is the reality of the people, which in some countries makes it much harder to deal with changes. Other countries are more progressive. Interesting enough, Spain, yeah, on the green side of developments, also on the digital side of developments. So also the Czech Republic, I guess, I presume, has got its difficulty to go with these changes and to rethink certain realities. So again, there's not one aspect which is affected with all these changes, and that's why it's so extremely important that we talk to each other, especially also with Great Britain, because you are quite free for the time being. And it's very interesting to get another benchmark. Are you doing it better? Are you doing it worse? It will be both. I guess these are the barriers, I would say. These are the potentials. We have to be aware of them. And it was said by you, I guess, that most innovations come from the regional level. This is probably, or you said it, this is the most competitive field. And we should also be able to look at this. What ideas come from the regions? In Spain, for example, if the transition is getting too stressful, that they invent the funding kindergartens, they're funding public libraries, which has nothing to do with the Green Deal, but just to appease people and to give them the confidence that changes can also be good, because you get a kindergarten and you get a library. So you see, one could talk half a day about this, but it's a mosaic. I guess we have to put the puzzles together, and yes, thank you.
Just a quick thing. It's actually very interesting because Austria has green budget tagging, which is very innovative. So also you can have innovation in unpredictable places. So actually RRF funding, the green budget example, is now looked at by all other member states. So again, it's the communication issues and best practice sharing. And originally I'm Latvian. One thing that I think actually is a positive story, and you really can sell your electorate, is ease of making business and ease of running your life. I call it life admin. I can log into one portal, everything's sorted. I can pay my taxes, I can do anything online. It's the same with Estonia, which has better PR. But the point is that also there is a lot of very tangible things that we can sell if we embed it into a nice narrative of this. What do you get out of it, right? What's in it for me?
Sorry, because I have had my difficulties answering your question, which is getting back to reality. Thank you very much for the question. But I wanted to say something about the narrative. We have had a discussion yesterday at the reception. Someone from Europeum said that the European countries, they all live in different time zones. The Czech Republic lives with the revolution 1989. Austria still lives 1955. We live more 1955, the independence after the Second World War, this success story. We still live in the narrative of the success story after the Second World War. The Spanish are catching up very much, getting very innovative because they were very traditional. That's why the society is so polarized at the time being. And Hungary is probably between the two wars. Why do I mention this? Yeah, because this is where the story starts, and this is where the people have got their mindset. And I guess this also we have to consider at least. And someone also said after this conversation, it would be nice if some countries would start, let's talk about the whole of Europe, would start to live 2023 and not just somewhere in the past.
Yeah, I mean, Matthias, you mentioned also the difference between the EU member states. I mean, there is a EU policy, but there is every EU member state has its own agenda as well. I guess Chris, in the sense of the UK, I mean, how important? I mean, you're collaborating with the EU, but also around the world. I mean, how important is the international collaboration and cooperation in terms of reaching those goals?
Yeah, so I think for the UK, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned different countries with their different pasts, and actually you can map that onto the transition as well in terms of, when did other countries go to gas boilers or went from coal-fired hearths? Yeah, we ended up being leaders in climate because paradoxically, we decided to take an economic decision to close our coal mines because there wasn't enough coal left to mine, and that was hugely controversial back in the 1980s when we closed the big coal mines. But in the end, the then Labour Party, which was totally against closing the coal mines, is now recognises the benefits environmentally that it was taking. So, understanding that we live in the worlds where we have to respect sort of traditions and work with them and not against them is important. I think for the UK. When I signed net zero into law back in 2019, I also secured, on the back of that, 3 weeks later, the UK's presidency of COP26, where we had the Glasgow Climate Pact. And I was really struck, because I was also a science, research, innovation minister, as well as being energy minister. I was doing 2 jobs. And I remember coming to the Czech Republic as science minister, trying to, because we were so close and as allies between the UK and the Czech Republic, and the sort of that sense that we were always sort of allies in Europe, and that the UK had left the EU, but we still wanted to maintain our friendships and bilateral potential opportunities to collaborate if it was a no deal. So I sort of would come here, but at the same time, when it came to climate, countries like France that wouldn't talk to me about science and research would happily get on the phone to me with the ministers to talk about COP, and France backed our bid, which allowed us to host Glasgow. But I think in our head, and we never explicitly said it, but post-Brexit, the UK was looking for its own narrative about where does it sort of, how does it position itself in the world. And so the opportunity of doing net zero, being the first G7 country to do so, even though we're 1% of global emissions, how can we then influence China and India, was part of that wider sort of narrative. But I think, potentially we've gone too far in trying to think just about the globe without also thinking about our close partners and neighbours in Europe. And I sit on the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly, which obviously allows for thinking about the future areas of collaboration, whereas obviously the UK working with our European neighbours, we need to come up with common ways of focusing on hydrogen transportation, on potentially regulations that we've got to be able to deliver together. I mean, I think it's a shame we didn't take forward the carbon border adjustment mechanism alongside the EU, because at the moment we're sort of waiting. And my narrative in the review was there's no prizes in being a sort of first follower. Actually, showing leadership here is where you actually claim the advantage, you set the trend. And I think the challenge at the UK at the moment is, yes, we wanted to sort of show international leadership and to try to demonstrate sort of where the UK would go post-Brexit. And I think that was a welcome direction to try to show that international leadership on climate. But when it comes to the nuts and bolts of how you get things done, focusing on regulation, legislation, we do need alignment. We can't just wait to see what the EU does and then differentiate slightly, thinking we're going to get sort of comparative advantage. Maybe that we will do on certain regulatory things. Taxonomy on hydrogen, for example, the UK is not necessarily going down the route of the EU's taxonomy, the rainbow-coloured hydrogen. We're going to create our own sort of low-carbon hydrogen standard so we can sort of focus on the transition and avoid sort of just castigating blue hydrogen at the expense of green hydrogen. But we will need to find common calls, because we need to learn the lessons of the previous transition, as I said, about electricity. We don't need 14 different types of plugs, sort of like, and having to sort of wait, buy adapters at the airports every time when we basically move countries. We've got the chance now in this 10 years to map out what the future will look like for the next 100 years. And that's where we need to, to work together on certain aspects of alignment at a European level, and not just think, let's focus on, the just transition elsewhere. We've pledged investment in India, Vietnam, South Africa with these opportunities to decarbonise countries, and that's great. But I think sometimes it's at the expense of focusing on this sort of closer piece, which is a united sort of European model of how we decarbonise, but also put excellence and quality at the heart of that decarbonisation agenda.
I'm looking at the questions from the audience at the Slido, and I'm trying to think, how they fit into our discussion right now. But when you mentioned, like, Austria and the UK and the Czech Republic and Latvia, there one question from Mats says, on the advantage of centralized governments and authoritarian states, I mean, they seem like they might appear efficient, but can we trust their figures? I don't know who wants to start. It's not pointed to a specific person, but
my one sort of observation would be, the technological revolution that we're going through means there is no place to hide, and that is obviously a question about whether then the people in that country decide to challenge their governments if their governments are claiming things that aren't happening. But from space we can spot every methane leak, we can spot every sort of opportunity now in a way that we didn't. So people are being exposed in ways, and we can recognise through market mechanisms when people aren't telling the truth as well. Sort of investments and investors can quite rapidly expose falsehoods. The challenge is going to be, from a political perspective, how we relentlessly pursue the truth and step on disinformation, misinformation, which obviously social media can propagate rather rapidly. So there's a double challenge where technology is also our greatest sort of helper in terms of trying to ensure we have more information. It's also the greatest hinderer in making sure that the right information comes out at the right time.
I completely agree. The types of data collection that we have now are very, very different from the past. It's also more about the implementation rather than the figures, because implementation is kind of where the devil's in the detail, right? We can have pledges and commitments. How we actually translate that into implementation in micro fields has been one of the biggest challenges of sustainable transition. And this is where I think you mentioned already that, we have EU taxonomy, we have all these other ways of trying to figure out how do we implement certain types of regulation to our benefit, which seems now like a big burden. But actually, if you explain it very well, people get it. And this is another thing of explaining how you can actually implement these things. And this is where I've seen in China and also some other places, which have different types of governance, more streamlined, they can implement these things much, much faster and tweak them much, much faster than we can sometimes.
Actually, there's a question from Jirka, as he says, especially it's directed to Linda. He says, what would be a good example of successful storytelling and successful political campaign addressing climate change at any level?
Well, that's. I think we already discussed that it's actually very regional or very location specific. What story could work in Czech Republic? I'm not so sure it would work elsewhere. So it's to understand your audience, understand the mindset, understand what actually worries people and keeps them awake at night, and what are the common denominators. It's not easy to do, but I feel that often there's not enough effort to think through what could be better narratives and actually put the research and the time and the effort into it. And then also building alliances and allies. I think that there's a lot of commonality, a growing commonality amongst business, finance, and even NGOs. And I have multiple examples in other countries where actually these stakeholders that used to be relatively hostile to each other, all of a sudden realized that climate, or maybe social inequality in some cases, is the one common denominator that we can all stand behind. And I think building that alliance or some common denominator is very, very important. And it is done, it is possible to do. It's not easy, but I think also the country, the states need to put a lot more money into it. And actually your French example of a think tank, NHS in the UK was a think tank idea. Actually, countries can fund think tanks, and I think that most of the Central Eastern European countries don't. And then you're like, oh, we're like rule takers, we don't really Brussels thought of something again. It's like, well, where are your thinkers? Where are your applicable ideas that can influence the EU agenda? Very few, and that's, I think, a big problem. We actually listen to UK think tanks. So thank you to the UK.
Chris, going back to the net zero, with you mentioned earlier. I mean, obviously, we've been discussing how it can be also popular and it can be a vote winner. But why? I mean, we should be decarbonizing the energy sector, even if it didn't have a climate emergency. I mean, it seems like this is the kind of opportunity now. I mean, obviously, we have COP coming up at the end of the month. And climate change, we've seen the experience. I mean, I'm from Greece, and now we have 20 degrees still, and it's like it's like middle of November. And I'm actually looking forward. I'm actually glad I came to Prague, and I can walk outside and feel a little bit of that. It's beginning, it's fall and going into the winter. So why is net zero a vote winner, and why we should be decarbonizing regardless?
So I think there's two aspects I'd like to address there. One is actually we're at the mercy of events, as always, and there will be unknowable events that come down the track. So the sort of linear pathway towards net zero, there will be other things, twists and turns in the road that we need to anticipate, and being flexible about that is important. One of those unknowable events was obviously Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And that's really helped shift the understanding, I think, both in the UK and in Europe, that net zero is not just about an economic opportunity, it's about driving our future energy security through diversification, through getting off foreign oil and gas. It was a cost of gas crisis, it wasn't a cost of energy crisis. And to recognize that the gas price and oil price is only going one direction over the next 30 years. So understanding that we can have homegrown energy, that we have a blended form of energy, we recognize that we can't stand still. And that if to do so would threaten the very nature of whether we can keep the lights on. And previously it was always a narrative, these renewables, when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, are we going to endanger our energy security? Now we can turn it on its head and say it's over-dependence on fossil fuels in the future will threaten our energy security. So I think that's been an important additional narrative we need to weave into the net zero story that, again, in 2019 I wouldn't have really necessarily thought about. But Ukraine has managed to build 18 times more onshore wind turbines than the UK. We've only built one in the past year because we have this sort of cultural antipathy to onshore wind. In the same way that Germany is against nuclear. It's interesting that each country has its own sort of prejudices based on their traditions, but hopefully that's now sort of changing. And trying to win those sort of arguments around energy security, around community energy as well, is also really exciting because we can demonstrate people the benefits they can receive locally if they are partners in this. And then there's this case around saying, in the past, we all benefit from a world where energy was very top-down. And we've talked about communism, but in a way, sort of, our national grid in the UK was a 1950s, 1960s centrally government imposed system. It's not going to be the same now. And energy as a service, seeing sort of, no one paid for our mobile phones. We all moved to, mobile phones because the technology improved and the utility was there. And it's going to be the same with energy. And with that, we often over-focus on supply. It's obviously really important. It's very exciting to look at this, and it's shiny and new, and you can see the buildings. But we need to focus on demand, reduction in demand, whether that's domestic, residential demand, decarbonising homes, moving to heat pumps, or whether it's industry. And that's where, in the UK, 8% of all businesses are responsible for 80% of our gas use. And while we talk about, how to get people off meat and, drive less and all this other stuff, which, the challenge with net zero is everyone wants to do everything all at once, or everyone wants to, all these think tanks sometimes be like, let's try and get the paper, let's get some coverage for our idea. The reality is it's about politics, about priorities. And priorities are also there with net zero. And if we can shift the dial by really sort of focusing on just a couple of industries, and as I said, making sure that we send them that message that decarbonisation does not have to lead to deindustrialisation, that there is an opportunity to create new materials, new products, low carbon products, that's the sort of core sort of place I think we need to be also. So I think for myself, that question about, in a way, net zero went viral. It was easy for business to understand that end date, and this two-word term is great copy for the media. But we also need to frame net zero in different ways and have that innovation in policy as well as technology, where we're constantly reframing net zero in a way that can help drive forwards the progress further and faster.
From the business perspective, I mean, where do you see the greatest potential for advanced, green and digital technologies that we mentioned, and also, on this, because we're talking about also that decarbonization should happen anyway. I mean, it seems like such a good business opportunity.
I guess very much, and it was confirmed by you. We have to differentiate between the macro level and the micro level. And the solutions come from the micro level. And we have made a survey about the consequences for Austrian businesses and the Austrian society and the European society and European businesses from the twin transition. And it's very interesting that the experiences of, or the takeaways of this survey are the following. Twin transformers are among the leading companies of tomorrow. I mean, that's a given. That's not arguable. Twin transformers are 2.5 times more likely to be among the best performing companies of tomorrow. But only 1/5 of the sustainability technology pioneers in Europe currently manage to be twin transformers. And now this I would say is the general assessment which affects all of us. But now we come to the regions and we come to the solutions and to the micro level. And here, if you look at Denmark, for example, which is a front runner with twin transition because of subsidies, of tax breaks. They've got 14 climate partnerships. They have bilateral twin transforming corporations ongoing. There's much to do with culture. They're also working internationally with the Netherlands or the Baltic states or the Scandinavian countries. Then you have another front runner, which is Finland. In digitalization is also using this potential for the twin transition. They have got state programs. I don't want to go too much into detail. They're working with super cluster initiatives. They got, I mean, it's also a mentality issue. In Portugal, for example, which is interesting enough, you wouldn't presume that Portugal is that far, but the same with Spain, is a leader in the use of ICT for environmental sustainability with a focus on transformation. They have huge startup programs. They're very much going into the cooperation with startups. There's lots of money involved. And these are the ingredients for finding solutions. And I think it's also, we should underestimate that the transformation should also be competitive to a certain extent. because innovation can also only happen in a competitive environment.
I think it's actually very interesting because that's a question of entrepreneurial spirit. But I think that also that links massively to the education system. If you look at the Finnish education system, Danish, etc., I mean, the Baltics are starting to try and copy it because we were like, oh, we can just try copy that. I think smaller countries also feel a lot more pressure. So there's also another interesting element of that. And I think that in the Czech Republic, you actually do see some amazing efforts on the startup scene. I talk very frequently actually to the Austrian Startup Association as well. It's an interesting space because what do we need as skills for the future, right? If we're going to have AI, etc., where do we have that competitive advantage? So Finland and Estonia decided, well, we can do digital. We have tiny country, that's where we can double down. And I think that here actually examining which crucial areas in each country can do these solution building, etc., is very, very important. And here the education systems really need to adapt. I did my first degree in Scotland, second degree in London. It was completely different to what I heard from people who were studying in Germany, people who were studying in Latvia, etc. Actually, some countries, that's why you have this talent flocking there, because you get a wider skill set. So not just a skill set that is, hard skill set, you also get a soft skill set. And the combination of the two can really create something quite important in business, because you can have people skills, you can have speaking skills, you can have a variety of different skills. And we need to think about how we also do lifelong education. And that's a big question, because people will need retraining. And also we need to instill in people that and this I think is a really big problem in Central Europe, you need intellectual curiosity, you need to learn and read what other people don't read, you do need to constantly learn, otherwise you stagnate. And that's a very important message I think that I would like to send, especially to the business here in Czech Republic and across the region, is that you will become obsolete or you will start losing clients unless you start understanding much deeper what this climate change, climate transition will mean, what digitalization and AI means, and also what the next generations want. Because they might actually decide to park their money elsewhere and they might buy different types of products. And just doing machinery forever, well, now you have sick man of Europe, Germany. Whoever thought that might happen? So let's not underestimate what might happen in the next decade, because the change can be much, much faster than we expect.
I see two questions separately, but I think maybe we can connect them. One says, should the European Commission take an active role to achieve a green digital internal market to increase the scale and efficiency of EU data infrastructure? And another one, which is directed to Chris, and says, has Brexit been correcting a way to green transition in the UK? Has Brexit been correcting a way to green transition of the UK?
Correct, as in helping to aid the transition.
I would imagine, yeah.
I think there's I think that Brexit has placed the UK in a point where they wanted to accelerate. And certainly with the previous Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, he had sort of decided this was his mission and he wanted to go ahead. Now, the challenge is if the UK decides to go slow with a couple of things. I mean, who would have thought that the UK aligning with Europe on electric vehicles would be seen now as a policy disaster? And that was the challenge, is that we had this narrative of actually we can do things differently from the EU. We can go further, faster, and we had begun to do that. And now we ended up aligning on some of the electric vehicle aspects. I is still hopeful that there is an enthusiasm, putting aside the politics of Brexit, that the UK can remain a climate leader. As I said, we are still sort of there in the G20 as sort of decarbonising further, faster. Our national determined contribution, so we've got the EU's Fit for 55, 55% emission reduction by 2030. The UK is 68% emissions reduction. So we're still going strong. But I think that the challenge is not to David Cameron's coming back as Foreign Secretary now. So to what extent, there's a narrative of the UK recognising that we, in the past, had this sort of unfortunate rhetoric about sort of UK exceptionalism, and I think that's where we can basically differentiate. We shouldn't be hostile to that, but equally, we've got we're not going to be able to create economies of the future unless we collaborate. So I actually think, ever since the Windsor Agreement, there's been like a huge sort of melting away of hostility. It was very difficult to actually get in the same room with people, to have discussions, or people simply just said, I can't comment. And now there's this sense that, particularly when I go to Brussels, of us willing to work, and other European politicians willing to work with us in a way that wasn't there a couple of years ago. So Brexit's happened. I think it's here to stay, regardless. All political parties in the UK are sort of committed to this post-Brexit sort of world. But let's get back to what we were doing, before, which was, recognising where we have opportunities to collaborate and accelerate, the ability to move further faster as a result.
About the EU, the European Commission is taking an active role to achieve a green digital internal market to increase the scale and efficiency of EU data infrastructure. Do you think they're doing enough, or they should do more? Yes, do.
Everybody always wants the European Commission to do more, right?
I must interrupt you.
There's two camps, right? Some people want it to do as little as possible, and the other camp wants it to do everything, right? So foreign politics, security, absolutely everything. I think that there's a lot that actually countries can do individually. I don't necessarily think that they always need massive help from the Commission. And this is where, you see these also small regional corporations can be very powerful. The Baltics tried to do that. They did it for the COVID bubble, so created like a little internal trio there. There's a lot more that can be done, but the reality is that I think the homework needs to be done nationally rather than over-reliance on Brussels will fix it from the political circles. And if Brussels gets it wrong, then we get to blame them. This is great. Well, that is not necessarily a very wise approach. I think talking about actually the geopolitics of sustainability and climate change, I think that where actually the strength lies is the UK's fantastic network of foreign relations and relationships with foreign governments, which the EU has it too, but in different areas of the world. So I think actually close collaboration on bringing on board countries of the global south, as we call them, is super important. And that's something that I think actually the UK and the US have a bigger thinking in terms of actually considering that, we have Latin America, big markets, big players. We really need to strengthen that collaboration. The Czech presidency did a great job actually bringing together the climate envoys or ambassadors, as you call them. And actually the one shocking finding was that they had never heard of sustainable finance. What is that? So the point is, if you're a climate envoy, you really need to work on the external side of Green Deal, on this transformation. And part of that is money and finance. And we will need to strengthen that and figure out how do we tie, very neatly streamline the Paris Agreement commitments, all the COP agreements and pledges and commitments that we do, and how do we actually figure out how we implement them in practice and make sure that we walk the walk and don't just talk and then nothing materializes. And this will be for credibility of the EU. Also, if you think about global markets, where the growth markets are, demographics, they're all somewhere else. They're not in Europe, right? We are aging continent, which has its advantages, maybe, but, we actually need to become a lot more global thinking, seeing the bigger picture. And often we're too focused on what will Brussels do internal, but we also need to keep in mind that it's the national government and it's also the big picture where it all fits in.
Yeah, there was a report recently from the International Energy Agency, and it was talking about countries of Latin America and the Caribbean, how, for example, there was a first ever report and how there's a really huge potential there. Christy, now we have COP28 coming up. Do you think that, you mentioned it briefly before, but are you optimistic about actually, this one not just being one more summit, but actually, having some tangible results?
So I think with COP28, we have this global stocktake, as I mentioned earlier, where countries will have to come back, effectively mark their homework and say what progress they've made. And obviously, there will be some countries that have not made any progress whatsoever. And the important thing is not to sort of berate and castigate these countries, but to sort of work out, what happens next. And that's where the Paris Agreement's a bit silent. Yeah, we talk about this global stocktake, which was in the Paris, the treaty, but then it doesn't say what you do on the back of the global stocktake. So obviously, America and Germany have really taken the lead in pushing a couple of key agenda items, the trebling of renewable power by 2030, which we saw with the bilateral with US and China the other day. There seems to be now obviously a strong alignment that this will happen, and that will be a great sort of success. If you've got China, the US behind it, and we just need India now to sort of row in behind this commitment. And obviously, on energy efficiency, methane, that's a big challenge, I think, for Eastern Europe, and sort of understanding how we reduce methane reduction, because there was a 30% commitment by 2030 at Glasgow, and again, not much progress has been made, but we know methane's 54 times more warming than CO2. So there's key aspects where, in a way, it's a bit like what I said with Trump and the Paris Agreement, because the UAE is aware of obviously their fossil fuel heritage and the sort of role that the COP president plays also running ADNOC, they'll be invested in making sure they've got an outcome. And I think sort of this being an ambition COP, what we'll also need to look at is what then is set up, not for COP29, because obviously we don't know where COP29 is going to be. Obviously that it was meant to be in Eastern Europe, and there's been obviously challenges around getting agreement. But COP30 in Brazil, we know that's going to be taking place there. That's going to, so I would look in COP to see what is then agreed to then come back for COP30. But I think it's quite promising if we can live. The challenge for me I'd like to see is obviously that we don't see a watering down on our commitment of phasing down fossil fuels. I would like a phase out narrative to be sort of stronger, but making sure we don't sort of row back further from what was agreed at Glasgow is also going to be important.
Linda, do you see that anything regarding COP28? Do you see reaching any going forward in terms of from the previous COPs, 27?
I'm maybe a little bit more skeptical about how big a change this COP28 will bring, because of various geopolitical and other issues that have also taken a bit of the wind out of the sails. Unfortunately, it is what it is. There's a lot more hidden anger and other issues. I think that actually the COP30 is probably where I would quite like to see quite a sea change, purely also because we're getting very close to 2030 then. Very, very close, much closer to 2050. It's not just a notional far away number. It's actually approaching really fast. And I think one thing that I'm really hoping is going to happen is the plastics agreement. Actually, I think that's a fantastic achievement that UNEP has got, that, we are trying to actually deal with the plastics crisis, because that can affect so many different ecosystems, etc. And also I'm putting a lot more hope on, finally, we're starting the conversations about biodiversity as well, because that also needs to be tackled. So I think hand in hand, we need to start figuring out how we streamline these agreements. And then, of course, the implementation phase, we need a lot more support on the implementation.
Matthias, you have anything to add to that, or?
No, I just would like to say I liked very much this how you were referring to the electric revolution. It just happened, and there wasn't so much political initiatives, I guess, at that time. Things don't happen nowadays because it's very complex and it's very interconnected. But on the other hand, it needs a mix. On one hand, this pragmatic, innovation-oriented freedom, and on the other hand, we need to come to the standardization, especially with the digital artificial intelligence evolution. If it's like learning a new language. And every new language needs a grammar. That's pretty obvious. And for that, the European level is absolutely necessary. Can you imagine how Europe would deal with all these challenges without this institution? It would be even worse. But on the other hand, because the question was, is Brussels overdoing or not? Sometimes it's overdoing, but it's a political question because it's all about, also, unfortunately, also about ideology. And some people want it more state controlled and others want it freer. So we have to find a mix. Yeah, we are very much advocating that we need also, I mean, it will be a win-win story after the establishment of the new reality, but how do we get there? And the question is how to bridge it. And we need a value creation even in between. Yeah, so it can't be only by public financing because we don't have that much money. And this is what we are very much advocating as a business association.
We have about 5 minutes left, and like what I always like to, when we wrap up my panels, is like, we know we have NGO, we have government, and we have business. And I would like to, before we wrap up, if from what you heard here today, if you have a question for my, fellow panelists, and kind of just a concluding, couple of sentences. Chris?
So, I mean, I've obviously, coming from the UK, was keen to take part in this conference, sort of demonstrate where we still need to build opportunities to collaborate and to move from the politics of the recent past to use the energy transition as a means to actually identify shared solutions, common challenges. So I was actually struck when you mentioned when it came to the Eastern Europe and the sort of lack of potential sort of policy development, how to try to really encourage that for the future. Obviously, I think sort of I've sort of called also for greater sort of UK, sort of European energy sort of opportunities. So I'd be keen, and one of the reasons why I'd come here was to say, I've got the book out, Mission Zero, trying to get other countries to look at doing their similar reviews. Getting down into the detail of implementation. So an invitation for anyone to do get in contact if there's abilities for us to collaborate in the future. I'm keen to sort of demonstrate that this is something where we can all benefit from working together, and from a policy perspective, I know the UK is also keen to not just be an island when it comes to net zero, but to really promote that message of understanding that we can both benefit from working on common projects.
I think that's a very good message, because what we need is actually some sort of strategic review and reset. Mm-hmm. The issue is that currently Germany has sustainable finance strategy. Some countries are doing some sort of 2050 thinking, what the economy should look like, where are the strengths, where are the investment needs. Actually, Czech Republic does have one project now, which is under the transformation unit of Ministry of Finance. It's a very new unit. The fact that it's even been established is a miracle and a revolution at the same time. So we're super happy that that even happened. And there is a technical support instrument by DG Reform looking at sustainable policy options for the Czech Republic. So, for example, this is a small step, but it's at least a step in the right direction. And I completely agree that actually having these national and regional potentially reviews in terms of what kind of strategic reset investment needs could be combined with the solutions in a much more clear, detailed roadmap with numbers would be very, very helpful, because how we win over the skeptics is with the numbers. And here, one part is the setting the strategic vision, inspiration, which I think is super important. But in a pragmatic, very traditional region, people want the numbers. They want some guarantees. And I think this was where also public-private partnerships that are fairer, and the business needs to be also fairer, and maybe not always pushing for as many nice deals. If there can be a good, fair deal reached, I think that could be really transformational, because public finance is definitely not enough. And we also need the foreign investment from big investment funds.
Matthias?
As you said, this sustainability aspect brings long-term financing into it, and which is also a very good correction of the way of thinking and how to deal with businesses. Platforming, I guess, is very important. We know the goals. We don't always know how to get there. This is a bit problematic, and that's why we have to learn from each other how people are affected, how countries are affected, how industries are affected. Of course, lots of technicalities. The grammar with the new language is provided by Brussels, which is good. But don't forget that if you want to speak a language, then you have to feel it. And for this we need time, lots of understanding, and platforming in every sense. We have been talking about education, lifetime learning, and the soft skills are very important. And yes, I'm quite optimistic. The goals are set, but we have to find the solution how to get there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthias and Linda and Chris, for this wonderful discussion, and I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Now, this is the end of our panel, and now we're moving to the next one. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the wonderful discussion. Now it's time for coffee break, so enjoy your break and your refreshments. At 11 o'clock, there will be a roundtable discussion in the Kampa room. It's the closed one, so it's only for those who were registered. And at 11:10, we will be here again in the Golden Hall to discuss transforming European economy smartly and efficiently. So be back here, please, at 11:10 and 11 at the roundtable. Thank you very much.
In just under 300 days, Europeans will take to the polls in our unique and remarkable democracy. Among them will be millions of first-time voters. The youngest of them were born in 2008. As they stand in that polling booth, they will think about what matters to them. When I speak to the new generation of young people today, I see that same vision for a better future, that same burning desire to build something better, that same belief that in a world of uncertainty, and that is what we have to do together. It is the moment to show them that we can build a continent where you can be who you are, love who you want, aim as high as you want, a continent that is united in freedom and peace. This is Europe's moment to answer the call of history. Long live Europe. Our Team Europe approach has enabled us to be more strategic, more assertive, and more united. We want to lead efforts to make the rules-based order fairer and make distribution more equal. This will also mean working with new and old partners to deepen our connections. Just last week, when I was in Delhi, we signed, I think, the most ambitious project of our generation, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. These are state-of-the-art connections for the world of tomorrow, faster, shorter, cleaner. These are investments in our partners' economies and their investment in Europe's prosperity and security in a fast-changing world.
Poslední úvěr ve výši 790 milionů euro nám vlastně pomůže zainvestovat v následujících několika letech právě do toho, abychom byli schopni naši distribuci připravit na výzvy budoucnosti, to znamená na instalace obnovitelných zdrojů ve velkém měřítku.
Evropská investiční banka je pro nás opravdu stabilní partner. Projekty, které jsme uskutečnili a pravděpodobně by se možná ani nerealizovali, kdybychom nespolupracovali s EIB, tak jsou například vybudování nemocnice následné péče v Moravské Třebové, což je záležitost unikátní, protože v České republice se nejvíce investuje do nemocnic akutní péče, urgentních, a toto je nemocnice doléčovací.
Děkuji EIB za to, že nám pomohla s financováním lokomotiv Trax MS3, to znamená, jsou to vícesystémové moderní lokomotivy. Tím, že jsou to nejnovější lokomotivy v Evropě, tak mají dokonce sníženou spotřebu o 5 až 7%. Spotřebu elektrické energie, to znamená, že jsou nejenom zelené, ale jsou vlastně ultrazelené, protože jsou vlastně efektivnější než jiné elektrické lokomotivy.
My pracujeme se společnostmi tak, že z jejich plastů jim děláme jejich produkt. Je to takzvaná cirkulární ekonomika. Investice více jak 1 milion euro byla pro nás předtím neuchopitelná. Jo? Takže my jsme za to rádi, posunulo nás to někam dál. Mohli jsme si koupit zařízení, které je sofistikovanější, který nám umožní lépe zpracovat ten odpadní produkt.
Nová linka medzi SGEF a EIB má podporiť projekty, ktoré doteraz neboli financovateľné tak na našej strane ako na strane EIB, a to sú projekty z oblasti inovácie, zelených investícií.
tohle je nádherná tělocvična, která vznikla právě z peněz Evropské investiční banky, ale nejenom tělocvična. Pak to jsou projekty dopravní infrastruktury, pak to jsou také projekty v oblasti sociálních služeb, pak to jsou třeba projekty, a to je asi největší část těchto peněz od Evropské investiční banky, které putují do nemocnic. Ta spolupráce s Evropskou investiční bankou určitě zlepšuje životy lidí, protože my bychom neměli takový velký objem finančních prostředků, které potřebujeme vložit do projektu.
The European Green Deal was born out of this necessity to protect our planet. But it was also designed as an opportunity to preserve our future prosperity. Europe's industry is showing every single day that it is ready to power this transition, proving that modernization and decarbonization can go hand in hand. Take the electric vehicle sector. It is a crucial industry for the clean economy with a huge potential in Europe. Our wind industry, for instance, is a European success story. We will fast-track permitting even more. We will improve the auction systems across the European Union. We will focus on skills, access to finance, and stable supply chains, from wind to steel, from batteries to electric vehicles. Our ambition is crystal clear. The future of our clean tech industry has to be made in Europe. We stay the course, we stay ambitious, and we stick to our growth strategy.
Planning a trip to Prague? Save time, hassle and money on admission to sites and attractions. Get a Prague Visitor Pass, the only official all-inclusive city card. Choose a pass for either 48, 72 or 120 hours for adult, child or student. Get a plastic card or a virtual card in the app. Simply activate it whenever you want. It gives you access to more than 60 historical sites, guided tours, museums, galleries, the world-famous Prague Zoo, and cruises on the Vltava River. The pass includes unlimited travel on Prague's public transport, ferries, the historical hop-on, hop-off tram, and the funicular to Petrin Hill. Go to praguevisitorpass.eu or download the free app. Prague Visitor Pass. One card, endless experience.
In just under 300 days, Europeans will take to the polls in our unique and remarkable democracy. Among them will be millions of first-time voters. The youngest of them were born in 2008. As they stand in that polling booth, they will think about what matters to them. And when I speak to the new generation of young people today, I see that same vision for a better future, that same burning desire to build something better, that same belief that in a world of uncertainty, and that is what we have to do together. It is the moment to show them that we can build a continent where you can be who you are, love who you want, aim as high as you want, a continent that is united in freedom and peace. This is Europe's moment to answer the call of history. Long live Europe. Our Team Europe approach has enabled us to be more strategic, more assertive, and more united. We want to lead efforts to make the rules-based order fairer and make distribution more equal. This will also mean working with new and old partners to deepen our connections. Just last week, when I was in Delhi, we signed, I think, the most ambitious project of our generation, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. These are state-of-the-art connections for the world of tomorrow, faster, shorter, cleaner. These are investments in our partners' economies and their investment in Europe's prosperity and security in a fast-changing world.
Poslední úvěr ve výši 790 milionů euro nám vlastně pomůže zainvestovat v následujících několika letech právě do toho, abychom byli schopni naši distribuci připravit na výzvy budoucnosti, to znamená na instalace obnovitelných zdrojů ve velkém měřítku.
Evropská investiční banka je pro nás opravdu stabilní partner. Projekty, které jsme uskutečnili a pravděpodobně by se možná ani nerealizovali, kdybychom nespolupracovali s EIB, tak jsou například vybudování nemocnice následné péče v Moravské Třebové, což je záležitost unikátní, protože v České republice se nejvíce investuje do nemocnic akutní péče, urgentních, a toto je nemocnice doléčovací.
Děkuji EIB za to, že nám pomohla s financováním lokomotiv Trax MS3, to znamená, jsou to vícesystémové moderní lokomotivy. Tím, že jsou to nejnovější lokomotivy v Evropě, tak mají dokonce sníženou spotřebu o 5 až 7 % spotřebu elektrické energie, to znamená, že jsou nejenom zelené, ale jsou vlastně ultrazelené, protože jsou vlastně efektivnější než jiné elektrické lokomotivy.
My pracujeme se společnostmi tak, že z jejich plastů jim děláme jejich produkt. Je to takzvaná cirkulární ekonomika. Investice více jak 1 milion euro byla pro nás předtím neuchopitelná. Jo? Takže my jsme za to rádi, posunulo nás to někam dál. Mohli jsme si koupit zařízení, které je sofistikovanější, který nám umožní lépe zpracovat ten odpadní produkt.
Nová linka medzi SGEF a EIB má podporiť projekty, ktoré doteraz neboli financovateľné tak na našej strane ako na strane EIB, a to sú projekty z oblasti inovácie, zelených investícií.
Tohle je nádherná tělocvična, která vznikla právě z peněz Evropské investiční banky, ale nejenom tělocvična. Pak to jsou projekty dopravní infrastruktury, pak to jsou také projekty v oblasti sociálních služeb, pak to jsou třeba projekty, a to je asi největší část těchto peněz od Evropské investiční banky, které putují do nemocnic. Ta spolupráce s Evropskou investiční bankou určitě zlepšuje životy lidí, protože my bychom neměli takový velký objem finančních prostředků, které potřebujeme vložit do projektu.
European Green Deal was born out of this necessity to protect our planet. But it was also designed as an opportunity to preserve our future prosperity. Europe's industry is showing every single day that it is ready to power this transition, proving that modernization and decarbonization can go hand in hand. Take the electric vehicle sector. It is a crucial industry for the clean economy with a huge potential in Europe. Our wind industry, for instance, is a European success story. We will fast-track permitting even more. We will improve the auction systems across the European Union. We will focus on skills, access to finance, and stable supply chains, from wind to steel, from batteries to electric vehicles. Our ambition is crystal clear. The future of our clean tech industry has to be made in Europe. We stay the course, we stay ambitious, and we stick to our growth strategy.
Planning a trip to Prague? Save time, hassle and money on admission to sites and attractions. Get a Prague Visitor Pass, the only official all-inclusive city card. Choose a pass for either 48, 72 or 120 hours for adult, child or student. Get a plastic card or a virtual card in the app. Simply activate it whenever you want. It gives you access to more than 60 historical sites, guided tours, museums, galleries, the world-famous Prague Zoo, and cruises on the Vltava River. The pass includes unlimited travel on Prague's public transport, ferries, the historical hop-on, hop-off tram, and the funicular to Petrin Hill. Go to praguevisitorpass.eu or download the free app. Prague Visitor Pass. One card, endless experience.
Your Excellencies, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome at the next panel discussion, this time dedicated to transforming European economies smartly and efficiently by leveraging sources to prepare for future. This time we will discuss economic opportunities which are stemming, for example, from the new tools that are available right now in the EU, especially Next Generation EU and the Repower EU. And during this panel discussion, we will welcome here Andrea Ferencíková, Marie Doné, René Neděla, Jan Švejnar, and the moderator Pavel Hnát. I would like to ask speakers and the moderator to take the seats, and we are welcoming you here at the Prague European Summit. Let me meanwhile remind you that you can interact with the panel via Slido application. You can find this event under the hashtag PES 2023, and you can also see the instructions here on the screen, so you can find this discussion and add your comments or questions here. And I can see that the panel is ready for discussion, so I would like to pass the floor to Pavel Hnát, Vice Rector for Education and Quality Assurance from the Prague University of Economics and Business. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that kind invitation. Good. Still morning. I think that everyone is looking forward to lunch already, but this is, I think, a very critical topic. We have decided that there are many economists and economics teachers even, so we will make this not very theoretical, but we will definitely use the benefit of having macroeconomists in the panel so that we can understand the topic from the broader perspective. I'll maybe once more introduce the speaker. European Commission is represented by Marie Doné, Director of Recovery and Resilience Task Force. Thank you very much for receiving our invitation. European Investment Bank is represented by Andrea Ferencíková, who's located in the Prague office of the EIB. We have Professor Jan Švejnar, the Professor of Economics at the Columbia University, and then Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Industry and Trade, René Neděla. And as we've kind of slightly discussed what's going on in this panel, we've decided to go alongside the topic of growth and probably more from the point of view what are actually the sources of growth and how creativity and digitization can actually help us in here. And maybe why sometimes we feel that Europe is lagging behind in these things. And I will use the benefit of having Professor Švejnar here and maybe starting with the first question going on him, and then I will be more than happy to have your inputs in Slido. So, Mr. Professor, how is it? What are the sources of growth? How creativity, digitization, business environment can actually make Europe grow better? And you have this unique experience. You can compare with a lot of countries in the world. Please do so.
Yeah, it certainly can. Let me just give you a very quick background. If we went back to the late 1980s, early 1990s, the discussion in the world was that Europe and Japan, for that matter, have pretty much caught up with the United States. And we were discussing where Europe will overtake the United States, in which areas. Okay? What happened in the next following 33 years or so is that the US has grown dramatically compared to Europe and Japan. Japan basically stagnated, slow growth. Europe grew slowly on average. Okay? So the differences went totally in an opposite direction. Part of it was that Europe basically missed the train on digitalization. Right? The US big companies, the Apples, the Amazons, Googles, etc., emerged during that time, subsequent time, and the technical aspect, the digital era, set in, and European companies are missing. Okay? If we looked in the early 1990s, the top 20 companies in the world, a large number of them were European. Now there is none. Well, no, there is LVMH, which is not a technological company. That's a luxury goods company, right? So that's the only place where Europe is now present in the top 20. The rest of them are American, some Chinese, and Japanese, Korean, right? Etc. So Europe has clearly missed the train, and the question is, what can it do to really try to catch up? And give you another statistic which is telling. Over the last 50 years, the United States has kept its GDP at 1/4 of the world GDP, with fluctuations, but it stayed basically at 1/4. Europe, which was close to 30%, is now approaching 15%. The fastest decline in modern history of a continent or group of countries. So the challenge is really there. Okay, Europe is basically not performing where it should be. Human capital in Europe is similar to that in the United States. I'm not talking about China because it's very dissimilar, a miracle, but Europe really should be asking itself, why is it not where it should have been starting in the late 80s, early 1990s. And the problem is that really there has not been the switch to modern technology, the innovation drive, even though the resources, human capital is there. And it has to do with the incentives, it has to do with the legal institutional system. Take even now the approach to green technology. The US in the Inflation Reduction Act is basically stimulating production. The subsidies go towards entry into the market, new firms entering the market, creating competition, and in the long run there will be a lot of relatively cheap energy. Right? Europe is going the opposite way. It's taxing, which is fine. It's trying to switch from one resource to another, from traditional to modern, but it's not in the way of stimulating entry into the market, increasing competition, and moving ahead with innovation. Right? So maybe for the start, I'll sort of stop here saying, look, Europe has a big challenge. I'm positive, always optimistic about Europe because it has so much potential. Right? The Americans have pretty much eliminated inefficiencies and have to innovate, otherwise they will not go ahead. Right? The Europeans can do the same, plus they can eliminate inefficiencies. I've just recently finished with colleagues from the European Investment Bank and one at the University of California at Berkeley, a study where we compared inefficiency in the United States and Europe across all the European countries. And we basically are estimating that if Europe became as inefficient as the United States, but increased its efficiency to the level of the United States, European GDP would be about 50% higher. So that's a big, big difference.
Thank you. Professor, could you maybe elaborate a little bit more where digitization contributes to growth? Because if you go to micro level, digitization is simply just a mean. It's not, in fact, bringing new value, right? Maybe it unleashes the potential of people that are doing things ineffectively. So maybe what are the ways how digitization can actually contribute to growth?
Well, it's contributing to growth. It's the technology. It's the modern technology, right? You had Industrial Revolution, where you had the steam engine and so on, you know, all the way through to now. It's the last 20, 25, 30 years, the way that modernization takes place, makes industry more productive, makes agriculture, makes services more productive. We're a service economy now everywhere among the modern countries. You know, the Czech Republic, for instance, here, often people say we're an industrial economy. Well, there's a little bit more industry here as a share of total GDP than elsewhere, but it's primarily a service economy, right? So it's a service economy, and the digitalization is certainly a way to proceed. And nowadays, of course, it's going to be artificial intelligence. So there is another train taking off, and the question is, you know, will Europe be in the driver's seat, or will it be just a follower? Right? So it's another thing I would like to say. Europe has been playing too much the role of follower rather than the leader. And you see it at various levels. Adoption of technology, even how the CEOs, chief executive officers, behave. The American CEOs are much more self-confident, on average, than the European ones. No reason for it, right? But it is there. The European stock markets, they start 6 hours ahead of the US, but as soon as Wall Street wakes up, all markets follow Wall Street, right? Again, followers rather than leaders. So, you know, you can find examples, you all know, where to find them.
And digitization per se, is it replacing or enabling technology?
Well, it's an enabling technology. Sure, every technology replaces something, right? But I think we shouldn't worry about that. And it'll be interesting with respect to artificial intelligence. We shouldn't worry about that in terms of replacing and creating long-term problems. There are adjustment problems always, especially human problems. But the unemployment rate over decades and centuries has pretty much with fluctuations stayed stable. So it's not like we are creating more and more unemployed people. No, basically there is restructuring, and there is restructuring with digitalization, there is restructuring with artificial intelligence. But so far, everything that we've had, containerization, industrial revolution, you know, you name it, whatever it was, didn't lead to long-term unemployment increase.
Thank you very much. Mari, Europe usually has strategies, but then it struggles how to make the member states follow that strategy. I do remember the Lisbon strategy, I do remember other stuff. So what are the marvelous ideas at the European level to tackle with the issue Professor Schweinar just mentioned quite critically, even though trusting in Europe's ability to at the end catch up. So what can the Commission offer? What are the European level ideas in this respect?
Okay, a vast program. I think, of course, I will in a second come back to your question on all EU initiatives, and obviously having those initiatives at European level, in particular when there's funding behind, is indeed one way to try to make Europe stay at the frontier and maybe indeed try to then take a leadership role aware of our starting point. But I also want to underline that, you know, what we are doing today with the team being in Prague is also, you know, trying to have that implementation at member states level. We really also need to underline the national ownership and you know, with the European tools that we have, also making sure that there is a concrete implementation in the member states. And in terms of the different source of growth, you have really several areas, and we can come back to them. But let me just, you know, in terms of structure, there is indeed education and skills and reskilling and all that. There is indeed everything which is in the area of, I would say, better regulation, trying to have a supportive entrepreneur environment and everything that we can do in that area. And I in that context, certainly, if I can dwell a bit more on that one, you must be aware that we now in the EU launching this initiative of SME Envoy, trying to really understand what those barriers are and how we can improve in the EU single market, and then of course with the reality on the ground in every member state, facilitating the daily life of the SMEs, because this is really the backbone of the EU economy. You must be aware also that our president has recently tasked Mr. Draghi to draft a report on EU competitiveness and prepare again, you know, the reflection on possible future action plan and initiative in that area. So, you know, along those lines, there are EU dimensions where we're pushing the, trying to really reduce those inefficiencies and contribute to productivity and competitiveness. I think also to resonate a bit from the RRF perspective, it's important to underline that in all plans for all member states, one part of the reform program, which is indeed really making a bet on the resilience and the medium term and the long term competitiveness. It's really cutting red tape, facilitating the daily life. So we have in all member states and also in Czechia reforms to digitalize administration, but also indeed the SMEs, making sure that we support them in, you know, having a better level playing field and access to, you know, sometimes one-stop shop or, you know, facilitating the administrative steps they need to take, supporting them in international competitiveness and simplifying, shortening permitting process in the construction, in the deployment of renewables along many, many areas so that they gain competitiveness and efficiency there. So that's, let's say, the poll on supportive environment. Let me, and then we can come back in another question, also touch on the digital area you mentioned already. So also Europe has a strategy there. In Europe, Fit for Digital Age, many programs and many indeed projects with financing behind, because I mean, when you look indeed in general in the EU, but, you know, to focus again a bit on Czechia, there are many indicators where Czechia is ahead of the EU average, but there are also still areas where, you know, they can catch up with the average and try to reach the frontier. So in the Czech plan, for example, in the whole financing envelope, there's almost 23% of the budget that will be dedicated to digitization and trying to gain the frontier. There is substantial money going into infrastructure, fixed connection. So I'm sorry, I'm going to bore you a bit with some figures, but I think it's also important for everybody to realize how much EU money is going there. So it's 148 million euro going into infrastructure fixed connection. It's 60 million euro going into 5G networks. It is promoting 5G solution for smart cities and industry. So really focusing on that concrete implementation with 45 million. And there is also a very important, and that's going to link the SME angle and digitalization angle. This tool with 55 million with equity funds, where we are really trying to develop equity financing, making the link also indeed with real economy, private intervention, and really also linking startups and academia, research and concrete implementation of innovation to really have those spin-off and you know, universities supporting the SMEs in that takeoff with joint ventures in AI and so on. I can come back to it, but I think it's already important to flag all the money that is going concretely in that direction.
Thank you. Of course, money is important. So do you think that the conditionality behind all this money is finally the right thing? How the Commission can push these, I mean, these ideas that sound marvelous to everyone to really make the governments stick with this goal and make them happen?
Okay, so your question is actually centered on the RRF tool, so the Recovery Resilient Facility tool, and which is very specific. The other EU initiative and access to e-funding are functioning on another methodology. And so for those in the room who maybe are not familiar with the functioning of the RRF is what we call a performance-based tool. So we have quite a lot of money, you know, it's part of our reply to the pandemic, clearly with recovery, the immediate boost, but a lot of resilience, and so this bet on the longer term. And with every member state has developed a contract, if you want. In our jargon, it's in this council implementing decision, but I think you should see this as a contract between the European partners, the European money, and all member states developing a plan, which is, of course, specific to the member states, to its needs, to its structural weaknesses, where it needs to develop with indeed its long-term strategy of developing, you know, the right measures, reforms, and investment for the twin transition, green and digital, both of them. And in that contract, we have what we call milestones and target. So it's very, if you want very clear, we have in the contract a timeline with clear deliverables in milestones, which are more qualitative requirements and conditionality, and target, which are clear quantitative targets with goals to achieve. And then in a strong cooperation between the national authorities and the European side, if you want, we are checking then the implementation. We are checking that at every meeting point and appointment we have in time, there is indeed compliance, so if you want delivery, performance-based on those milestones and targets. And when these are achieved, we pay. And that's, in the concept, very different from our other European programs, which are more cost-based. You develop, you send the bill, you get the money. Here we really want this to be implemented and delivering results. And I must say, a word of congratulations also for Mr. Nedela here on the panel, because we have an excellent cooperation here in Czechia, and we were discussing this morning, and we are really collectively trying to, push through, stick to the timeline, and deliver those elements of the contract.
Thank you. Andrea, you revived when small and middle-sized enterprises were mentioned, so maybe how does your institution fit into the game, and what are your initiatives to leverage the money for investment? Marie mentioned that of course resources are scarce and we need to find ways how to leverage everything we have at our disposal. So what's your place in the game?
Thank you for your question, and once again, good morning, hopefully. And maybe before I reply directly to your question, I would maybe give us two basic questions: why we are speaking about the growth and how we basically want to achieve the growth. The growth is really one of the tools where we need to create resources. And why are these resources needed? Because we have quite a lot of expensive challenges ahead of us. We have a climate change, we have energy crisis, and so on, I can name it, digitalization. So that's why we are speaking about the growth. And also the question is how. So Marie already mentioned several of the EU initiatives or policies. I think the fundamental one now is the Green Deal, right? And of course, all of the smaller initiatives which come along. On our side, at the EIB or European Investment Bank group level, we have basically very similar approach, because we are not a policy maker, we are policy taker and bankers. But what we do is that we really look at the policies which are endorsed by the European Union, because we are the investment arm of the EU, owned by the member states. Actually, it's Ministry of Finance who is, or Minister of Finance who is our boss, who is our governor. And so we are looking at these priorities, and we try to leverage our resources in order to meet the policy objectives or policy targets. And the second maybe mission that we have also is to implement or to react or get involved when there is a crisis, when really the economy needs anti-cyclical support. So just to maybe complement on this growth discussion. And what we are doing is basically, and speaking about the SMEs and innovations, of course, this is very close to our heart. And we are not only starting this discussion because of the Green Deal or because of some current initiatives. We are here, for instance, at the Czech market active since its beginning, so it's almost 3 decades. And that's why I'm mentioning, because 3 decades, and during this time we have mobilized or we invested almost or nearly 30 billion of euros into the Czech economy, not only to the state, not only to the regions and cities, but also to the real economy. And now I come back to the SMEs, because when I was looking at some of the statistics, I was positively surprised to see that 1/3, nearly 10 billion of the euros have been invested or provided for the Czech companies or startups or basically funds that later on invest in these smaller economies. And how we do that, or how we leverage, basically we as the bank, we have, or the European Investment Fund, which is also our subsidiary in these regards, to mobilize even much efficiently the resources for the enterprises. We either provide them credit lines through our commercial banks, we either provide the guarantees to the banks so they can finance some riskier projects. But what we do, and here is also great collaboration with the European Commission, we also use the money to prepare the equity programs, the equity funds for the either venture capital or private equity investments. And as we are speaking about the digitalization and innovation, it's also important to say that, and also thanks to Professor for highlighting the differences between the US market and the European market, and why we are also lagging behind a bit. From the perspective of investment, what we see is that the European market is more risk averse. That means that the investors, they don't want to, or they are not ready to invest in such a venture capital operations or startups. So that's why here we come, European institution, European Investment Bank, backed by some of the programs like InvestEU that we received the guarantee from the European budget and the European Commission. So we create the programs which really enable these funds and these later startups and pre-seeds and technological transfers and so on, really get this riskier part, because we are the ones who are taking the most expensive but the most riskier part, so the other private sector can come and can really boost some innovations and digitalization. So here in this is our role, you know, to enable and to create this leverage for the real business, maybe to have a much easier way to go ahead with these investments.
Thank you very much. René, how does the national government fit into it? I mean, it's probably wonderful that these, let's call them supply-side reforms, are pushed from the European level. They must be close to heart, as Andrea said, to the right-wing oriented government. Will you be quick enough to make these things work and live longer if we take the political cycle into account? And maybe do you have some true success stories of digitization or RRF, because very often we in the Czech Republic are strong in seeing the dark sides, and we are not very good in actually showing that we actually did a great job. So is there a case study that could be presented here?
So first of all, also, thank you for invitation me here, and thanks for the discussion. And also, I would like, to highlight the cooperation with the Recovery and Resilient team from the European Commission, especially the team for the energy for the negotiation. The first, second, Maybe I will firstly start, what you already said about the strategies, European strategies and also national strategies. I think that there should be also one target, to reduce the strategies. Yesterday we had a discussion with the people from the Chamber of Commerce, and the result was that from a statistic perspective, the Czech Republic has the highest number of strategies per people. Yes. I was surprised, for that, and I think that Europe will be on the same level. Why to reduce the strategies, or why to reduce the legislation? Because, for example, and I will give you one example. Do you know what is AFER regulation? And for sure you know what is a RED III directive, Renewable Energy Directive. AFER regulation, says, that if you would like, to make a decarbonization of the transport sector, then you should go, the way, electric vehicles, and you should go way of hydrogen car. If you are talking, or if you see what is written in the RED III directive, then the way is high quality fuels, or RFNBO, renewable fuels from non-biological origin, which means, in the Czech Republic that it will be biomethane, that the biomethane, will be main part of transport. And okay, if you have these two strategies or these two legislation on the table, and for one legislation is responsible Ministry of Industry and Trade, and for other legislation is responsible Ministry of Transport, and in one legislation you have just only these two ways, and on other legislation you have, like I would say, these three ways, there is a difficult, to find a solution which is the best. I think the best, and especially for a landlocked country as the Czech Republic, is that we should go use all possibilities which are on the table, and we should go, all three ways, and also use gas in a transport sector as an energy source. This is the first. Digitalization. I will give you an example. 2 years ago, there was approximately 10,000 of new installation, roof installations, especially of the solar. Last year, it was 30,000. First half of this year, it was 45,000 of new installation. If we will keep it as it is, without simplification, without digitalization, that there will be nobody who will be able to permit it, you know. So it's very important, you know, to go in line with the simplification and go with line with the digitalization, because there's no possibility, you know, to find a solution for this. And we did it, you know. Last year, you know, during the energy crisis, we did the 7 novels of Energy Act. 6 of them were because of the energy crisis. But last of them, we call it like Renewable Energy Act 1. It was for the simplification for smaller installation, you know, and we said, you know, till 50 kilowatt, you don't need anything, you know, you can easily build it, you know, without any permitting. And that's the first, I would say, you know, perfect example. Second perfect example is now, you know, when we are talking with the colleagues from Recovery and Resilience Fund, and what is now in we call it RES 2. On Tuesday, there was a second reading of this legislation, and there are some, you know, I would say paragraphs, you know, especially, you know, for Recovery and Resilience Funds, you know, for making the simplification and for digitalization. For example, there are maps that the TSO should present, you know, on the websites where is free capacity and where is no free capacity. It will be digital, and you as an investor, you can easily see if you have a land here or here, if there is a free capacity, and if you can, I would say, connect your power plant there or not. So I think, you know, that is second good example, you know, how, you know, I would say results from Recovery and Resilience Fund and reforms, and not just only reforms, but also the investments are in line with the national strategies and what we are doing here. The last comment which I would like, you know, to mention here is where we need, you know, maybe to speed up and more to catch, you know, the opportunity of a Green Deal. It is in a sustainable financing, and especially in the energy sector, and not just, you know, sustainable financing for investment, but also, you know, sustainable financing for financing, you know, not, you know, just only to put the money and say, okay, bye-bye, but we would like, you know, to come with the strategies that, okay, it will not be bye-bye, but it will be see you soon, you know, and this is, you know, what is very important in front of us, you know, important milestone and important target that we need to keep it like this, because if we will do it like bye-bye, that the growth will be very slow.
Can you communicate it clearly? I mean, because from what I know, Green Deal is not probably the most popular set of reforms in the Czech Republic. So is it well explained to the general public how big the potential actually is?
I think that the topic of Green Deal is very complicated, and it is very difficult, you know, to explain, you know, what are the opportunities, what is the good there and what is bad there. If I will go from this, what is bad, you know, this is about this legislation, you know, the legislation is not compatible, you know, there are the problems with the legislation, but this is also happened on the national level, so this is one way. Second way, yes, there are, you know, good examples, you know, how to work with the energy sector, to use the local energy sources, for example, sharing the energies, you know, to locally, you know, to consume the energy and not to use just only DSO distribution system, or transmission system, but to use it locally with your neighbor, with your family, etc. This is, I think, you know, a good example. The third good example is that also there are, you know, new rules about the permitting, you know, how to speed up the permitting, you know, what we can do for I would say better behavior, you know, and how to manage it, you know, one-stop shop and etc. So there are good examples and there are bad examples. And I think, you know, that we need it. It's not about if the Green Deal is or isn't, you know, it is, okay, Green Deal is here and we need to catch up this opportunity, you know, and try to use what is good there. And if there is something bad, so let's try, you know, not to use just only the bad examples, you know, but try to use the ways which are, you know, more better for the Czech Republic.
Professor Švejna, without general understanding within the general public, can these kinds of reforms be permanent, irreversible? Because people are also voters and they will vote.
Sure, they can. And I think what's important is what we've heard here from the panel is that there are now concrete steps, that it's results-oriented approach. And that is, I think, a big change compared to what we've seen over the last 20 plus years. Let me just remind you, somebody mentioned the Lisbon Declaration or Agreement, where in 2000, in the year 2000, it was declared that within 10 years, Europe would become the most technologically most advanced part of the world. So by 2008 and 9, as we were meeting at conferences like these, it transpired that it was not happening. So a new agreement was that definitely by 2020, Europe is going to be the most advanced, technologically advanced part of the world. Well, it's not, right? So, so in some sense, one really has to set, results-oriented and compare relatively to others, because if you move forward and others are running, you're falling behind, right? So Europe has to realize, and all the decision makers, that yes, results-oriented, that's important, and it's happening apparently. And second, that it has to be always looking and comparing to what others are doing, so that we can really move ahead. And so here, just sort of mentioning the small and medium-sized enterprises, really an important sector, which in countries that are doing well, that's a very dynamic sector. And there, I think, some important insights to be used are, for instance, that within that, an emphasis should be really on new firms, because a small firm that's been here for 20 years is unlikely to become a big firm. It's established, etc. And yes, you can stimulate it, but it's not going to create the Googles, Apples, Amazons of this world. Some of the new ones might, right? So really the emphasis should be on the startups. So when we talk about small and medium-sized enterprises, let's focus on the birth, right? And these firms also have huge mortality rate. Most of them don't survive. So you have to stimulate them in a way that some survive, and those that don't survive can have a new rebirth. So here, for instance, the law on personal bankruptcy is very important, because when you look at countries where this works really well, like the United States, basically personal bankruptcy is a very quick and productive process. The person loses his television, his car, etc., but emerges clean and can start again. And in fact, the fact that somebody lent this person money for a project, and knowing that most projects don't lead into anything, most of these firms die, this is actually a positive result. This person has achieved something and is ready to go for the next project, right? So in many countries in Europe, Czech Republic being a good example, you have bankruptcy, personal bankruptcy law, which makes this person pay for his life. In other words, future wages are garnished, etc., right? So rather than that person being able to get up and start producing again, that person is marked, and in fact hundreds of thousands of people in this country have gone into gray or black economy because the law essentially prevents them from operating and keeping the results of their work. So important things like these, I think, can make big difference in how it is. And yeah, unfortunately, the Czech system and system in other countries is really a legacy of medieval prisons for debtors, right? And so we start operating with that system today, instead of realizing that what we want is to make sure that these debtors quickly get over it, because after all, the creditors know that they are taking risk, right? They go into it and they diversify. They invest in many projects, knowing that most of them, will fail, but those that don't fail, the Amazons, the Googles, etc., will make them very rich. So in that sense, to penalize the people who are the bearers of progress, namely the entrepreneurs, by having a bankruptcy law which basically prevents them from being entrepreneurs further on, is going totally against where it should be going.
Yeah, unfortunately, one of those legacies is also how failure or mistake is perceived in Europe.
Exactly. That, mistakes are natural things. And again, you want to make the system such that people learn from mistakes, both creditors and debtors, right? And that you really stimulate the entrepreneurial spirit. And here I would say Europe again has a big challenge, namely, if you have startups that are technologically very good, and Europe has them, how do you keep them in Europe? Now, what these firms want to do is sooner or later is to be bought by one of the giants, because the giants can pay the most money for it, right? Well, the giants are not in Europe, they are in the United States. So it's very difficult for the best firms, small firms in Europe, to remain. I mean, they may remain in Europe, but they'll be part of Amazon, Google, Apple, you know, whatever, you name it, right? So in some sense, one shouldn't worry about it, although sometimes they're obviously brought to Silicon Valley or New York or wherever. So it's a challenge where, as a follower, and Europe is now a follower, not a leader in many of these areas, it's very difficult to become a leader given this particular setup.
Marie, this perception of mistakes leads us to education, right? You mentioned it. What are the specific steps that the European Commission can do in this field? And are we ready that these things maybe will materialize in 20, 30 years? Because I have 2 small daughters and the perception of mistake is already formed in kindergartens. So do we have some ideas how to change this, and are we ready that it probably won't materialize in this election period, neither in the next one, the next one, and the next one?
No, thank you for the question. And if you allow me, before turning to education, I'd like to thank the professor because he gives me the opportunity to talk a bit about Capital Market Union. Because the point he was making about how the bankruptcy procedure in the EU, in several member states, are a barrier to entrepreneurship, to innovation, is something which has been identified in Europe for many, many years. And unfortunately, I have to say, there is a Commission proposal on simplifying, destigmatizing, and harmonizing in Europe those bankruptcy procedures for corporates. The Commission proposal, I think, has been on the table for 6 or 7 years now, and it's what we call in Brussels jargon, stuck in council. So member states haven't been able to agree on what we call a general approach to actually facilitate that. Compared to the US, it's been touted for decennia as one of the elements to facilitate entrepreneurship and indeed foster that entrepreneurial spirit by, destigmatizing the failure and speeding up the process. Bankruptcies happen, but you can't be penalized all your life for it. And when in Europe, every member state has a different procedure for those bankruptcies. In some member states, it lasts 6 years. In others, more. And indeed, in some member states, you pay all your life because of one failure. It is not indeed simulating that entrepreneurship. So I think that it liaises very well that world of the supportive regulatory environment and what we can change that. It also makes a link into access to finance. Andrea was mentioning it, access to finance, the EU tools, EIB, the EU, but eventually it has to be private capital. And we can leverage them as much as we want, but in the end, you need private investors to step in there. And, if they get the feeling they'll be punished if they fail, and if they are barriers to access to finance, it doesn't help. So let me come to education now, because indeed it's a very important growth factor, and the human skills and our capacity to upskill, reskill is very key. Now, you know that in the end, EU doesn't have very, very strong competence there. We have, of course, many programs to stimulate that, and through some fundings we can, and in the RRF we actually fund a lot of reform of the education. And I can list you, for example, in the Czech plan, everything which is in that area. But I certainly concur that in the medium long term, the human capital side of it is one of those growth productivity factors. And we need to transition, and that transition is indeed very delicate. So we have in the Czech plan there a lot of elements to indeed prepare the skills for the future in green, in digital, and in general, you know, making sure that the people remain adaptative. So in the labor markets, and the labor markets are very tight now, in general. In Czechia, certainly, rather low unemployment, but in other many member states, it is the case. So you really need to onboard the remaining ones, especially women, to really come and make sure that we are at the highest possible employment level. But beyond that, of course, people need to constantly adjust in the labor market. So let me start maybe from, you know, the very basic earlier stage in that education chain. In the Czech RRP, with EU financing, there is support for increasing the number of places in nurseries, in crèche. So you have, you know, from the very beginning, earlier on, very young age, beefing up the capacity there so you have more women going on the labor market. Then there has been also in the plan reform of the curricula in primary school, in lower secondary school, in upper secondary school, so gymnasium. And in all those, you know, along the whole timeline, promoting digital literacy, digital skills, making sure that they have the equipment and that the teachers are skilled to accompany that. So some tutoring of the pupils. Also, I mentioned all the reskilling and upskilling. There is, I think, in the program overall, money foreseen for 130,000 retraining, reskilling. And that's green and digital, making sure that we really keep at the frontier. There is also a lot of effort in universities and in the programs there. Upgrading, if I can use that terminology, the programs and so on. Also, again, to have at the university level, of course, those new programs preparing the new skills, also having in mind everything which then follows, which is the research, and then making sure that, you know, we will loop back again with the real economy, the SMEs and the startups.
Thank you. There's quite a bulk of questions in the Slido, actually. Comparing Europe with America and not being very kind made our audience quite excited, though there is a whole cluster in it. Maybe I will just pick one of them because I think that we've elaborated a lot of how an American model can actually be of some relevance for Europe. The one question is, Europe is both the world's biggest exporter and importer of digitally deliverable services. So is it really the case that we've missed the train? Professor Schweinar.
No, I think in many areas not completely missed the train. I think it's important. Digitalization is used. The products that use the technology are used, and Europe is producing those and advancing and exporting. I think the question is, can it become the birth of new products, new technologies, new ideas, right? Because that's where the payoff is the highest, right? Once you just start using the technology, etc., it's important, but it's a much lower payoff. In the Czech Republic, there is this term montovna, which basically means you're not innovating, you're not inventing, you are using established, maybe modern technology to produce something with it. And so in that sense, yes, Europe is doing that. But I think what we're talking about is that Europe would really be the birthplace of the ideas, the early innovation, and so both invention, innovation, and then the rest of the world starts producing it. And so that's important, and I think that it will be important for the Recovery and Resilience Fund to aim at that. My impression is I was coincidentally here, one of the two coordinators when the RF was prepared in the Czech Republic, And at least in the areas I know, and I don't know everything, it has not sort of allocated money to top-notch research. Okay, because of the bureaucracy here and in Brussels and everything, the projects that are being funded are projects which will, be helpful, but this is not where the cutting edge is being born. Okay, so that's just a feedback to you guys. So in that sense, it should be. Similarly, and this is for you, Mr. Deputy Minister, in the United States, one of the reasons why the US is moving so much ahead is there is incredible symbiotic relationship between the universities and industry, right? Producers. Firms are contributing to schools dramatically. Here they're not, okay? Very little. Okay, so this is a totally different symbiotic environment, right? And it's one, one can blame the schools for not being possibly receptive and so on. So I'm not saying it's just one way, but it also is the feeling, the makeup of the approach that those who are the producers, the firms, are not far-sighted enough saying we need basic research, we need policy-oriented research, right? And we're going to work with institutions. I started here, one of the top-notch institutions called CERGI in economics, and we use the American model, and we've reached a really top-notch standard, okay? In Charles University external evaluation, we were the best. We were the best. But we have no chance from firms to receive support, whereas in the United States at Columbia University, we're of course getting a lot of support. So the approach to how to treat where the ideas are born and how they are developed is very important, both on the part of local firms and on the part of institutions within the EU. I think the ERC grants, for instance, are terrific. Okay, they fund top-notch research. But in the recovery resilience, I am hard-pressed to really point out where you're funding top-notch as opposed to here comes money, let's sort of use it somehow well, research. But well means mediocre, right? It's not the excellence which we have to aim for.
Thank you. Andra feels like adding something.
I would love to add just one element to complement Professor what he was just saying, and I believe that there is some light at the end of the tunnel in the RRF, especially under the one
I was
nice.
intentionally,
No,
just intentionally, just stimulate the conversation.
You see, here is the result. No, because what you are saying, and this is what I think that in my first intervention I was trying to make clear that it's really important that also the investment and environment is enabling, of course, besides all of these removing of the red tapes that we have, but we really also need to have a healthy investment environment to support the VC, the venture capitals. And what we have developed in cooperation with the European Commission and the Ministry of Industry and Trade here for under the RRF is really one of the fund of funds. The first part is with the allocation of 55 million euros. It would have 3 legs, basically 3 separate funds. And one of these funds is called or is dedicated to the transfer of technologies from academia to business, and it would be in the area of artificial intelligence. And I hope that this would be really one of the really opening initiative where these kind of projects can really rise. And furthermore, what we have discussed on the different forums here in Prague, but again in Czech Republic, is that you also need to develop the whole spectrum of these support for the firms. You can't only have one product for a healthy SME. You also need to look on this pre-seed side. You need to have a program which would facilitate supporting of the technology transfer. Then you also need to have some kind of scale-up financing. So you really need to look at the whole growth path of the companies. And I think that this is also slowly happening at the capital markets market here in the Czech Republic, because of course if you don't have enough of the firms which are ready to have such innovative ideas, then maybe you don't have these funds, but it has to go hand in hand. So I hope that these are one of the examples that we are trying to put in the market, so it would help also the Czech economy and Czech firms to grow.
Thank you. To stay on the nation level, I'll let René respond and then Marie.
Thank you. I would like, to do the two reactions. First reaction is, to US, I think that we should also, to teach how they can present their ideas, and not just only ideas, but also normal work. I've been there many times. I've been there for work and travel program as a student, and when I spoke with my colleagues from this program, and when we spoke, for example, about the culture, they said, yeah, we are the best. When we spoke about the car industry, yeah, we are the best. They really know how to present, their ideas, and most of them are market-based ideas, So this is, what I think, we need as a Europe, what we need, to learn from them, because I think that we are sometimes as a shadow mouse, so something like that. That's the first. Second, about the cooperation between the companies and school universities. I've been assistant professor for almost 15 years on Czech Technical University and Czech Agriculture University, and it is exactly as you are saying. Sometimes there are companies, they are just only thinking that the smart people with the good ideas, that they will come immediately from universities, and they don't need any pressure, any push, from their side. So that was my feedback. But I will give you also a good example. I'm also chief of supervisory board of Czech TSO CHEPS, and I think that they started 5 years ago with its Energy Olympics. The name is like Energy Olympics, and it's for universities and for students, that they can present, their ideas. We can send them theses, that they can work with the real life, with the real projects, and they can present, real projects, and the feedback is very positive. Some of the students, not a lot of the students, is now working for CHEPS, for Czech TSO, as an employee. So this is a good example, and also I think that, for example, chess is doing good job in this field, but I think that also it's not just only about these, I would say, big players, but also it is about the smaller, players and smaller companies. They should come to universities. They will help, to teachers if they will bring, thesis. Hey, I have a problem here, and okay, I need to solve it faster, so it will be a better project, or I can do it in 2 years, so then it will be, diploma project. I think that this should be, also the good target if we can, little bit push it forward, and not just only for these, big companies, but also for middle and I think small or medium,
Marie?
No, thank you for giving me the floor again. I wanted to actually add one more financing source to the one Andrea explained very well, and indeed bouncing on the question on the European priorities in terms of funding cutting-edge technologies and so on. And they are indeed those key enabling technologies and AI and at EU level, the priorities in financing research and innovation and providing the support and going towards those sectors. And I'm not an engineer, I'm only a poor economist, so I'm not sure I really understand what's behind, but I'm told that we are really focusing on those areas, micro, nano, electronics, photonics, AI, life science, advanced material, all that. And through the program, and obviously maybe our starting point compared to the US is the one that is there, but I think that there is really an awareness through Horizon Europe, ECR you mentioned, Digital Europe program, European Structural Investment Fund, to really retarget all this funding for research towards those sectors. And actually in the RRF, and then I'm complementing the tool, the equity tool, which Andrea mentioned already, we have now in the new revision CID, so in the new contract we've agreed with the Czech authorities, which was adopted now in September, there is actually a new tool, a new equity tool, with funding from RRF budget of 80 million, which will be, if you want, leveraged by EIF, and that will have the same logic that Andrea explained on the existing 55, but then now this time there's 80, and which is precisely targeted at those sectors. So trying to go to strategic technological sector, robotization, new technologies, material, semiconductors, biotech, and so on. Again, trying to really foster the research, the spin-off, using frontier academia work and working also on the transition with the real economy and SMEs, using also the access to finance there to have all those spin-offs.
Thank you. Another cluster of question is alongside the argument that it looks like only Europe and America are in the world, so let's dig into the rest of the world for a while. Latin America, Africa, China. So maybe for René, the role of China in Europe's digitization and resilience and self-reliance. For Andrea, do we have some tools that can, for instance, promote European ties with Latin America? And for Professor Schweinar, Africa and digitization. Thank you.
In field of this, in field of digitalization, it's not too much, my topic. I will try a little bit, to answer in field of energy, and how China is, working. What has happened here in the Europe, and what is impact here in the Europe if China is something doing. So first of all, from the perspective of critical infrastructure and digitalization, yes, here, I think, and we have a lot of rules, and a lot of legislation where it's written, that you cannot use, some of the strategic components, in a critical infrastructure because, there are some connections, maybe not too much favor country. But I will look mostly on the situation of gas, because gas is very nice example. 1 year ago, energy crisis, price of gas was 360 euro per megawatt hour. Electricity was 984 euro per megawatt hour. And that time, when we saw, what happened on the European market, the China market, and US market, we saw that, for example, typically in the US, they inject, the gas in their gas storages, and we saw that they postpone, the injection into their gas storages, and they send the gas to Europe. Mostly same situation, but it was because of the COVID happened, in the China, that China, reduced, their consumption of electricity, and they reduced the consumption of the gas, and the ships, with the gas, drove, from China to Europe. But it was not because of, I would say, business model, but this happened because of COVID situation and about the economic situation in the China. But US, they did it because of the market situation, because Henry Hub, price on the Henry Hub that time was, I would say, 7 times, 8 times, smaller than in TTF, in Europe, and they said, hey, business, why do inject the gas here, and keep it here, and to sell it, maybe in 1 year, still with the maybe small profit, we can send it to Europe, maybe we can add some profit, and still it will be more profitable, than here, and still the price will be more cheaper than what is the price, in the Europe, So I think that on this example, you can see, how the China or how I would say US energy market is connected also with the European market.
Thank you. Latin America, was it, right?
Yeah, I'm just also looking at you where I'm traveling now. Although I have to say that I'm not a specialist on this region, but first of all, European Investment Bank, being the arm of the investment arm of the EU, has its activities all around the globe. Basically, we are investing in really like the, dozens of countries, including the region of Latin America. And what we basically follow here is again the external policy or the policy of the European Union on the external relations. And as we are looking at the development world, many times it really the needs are a bit different, and the needs are to build the basic infrastructure, but also as we are the climate bank, you know, and we said that as of 2021 we are not going to invest into the projects which are not aligned with the Paris alignment. We somehow also define what are the priorities we want to support. And when I was earlier this year traveling a little bit in that region, you know, I was very pleased to see, even if you are traveling and driving and then suddenly you see a big billboard which says like this water treatment facility was supported in cooperation with the EIB. You know, I was surprised to see the logo of the EIB at the end of the world, but I was on the other side very, very happy that we have this footprint. And later on, when I spoke with the locals, and they said that in the capital just recently we have co-financed the hospital, and they call it the European hospital. You know, it's really like so different in the approach of the really like ordinary people, because if you would be walking here even in Prague, so many facilities have been upgraded, built with the support of the EU, but you know, people are not asking or not really like appreciating that it's Europe. We have a tendency to point on the Brussels only if the bad things are happening there, or Luxembourg. So this is something that, you know, we are doing quite a lot, but the perception is so different as within the EU. And one of the very nice examples I will be very happy to share also with you, because we had on Monday earlier this week at the female empowerment panel as a part of the Urban Talks of the Prague European Summit. And so I read about one nice example how in Sao Paulo, where actually in one of the outskirts, 60% of the households are led by the women. And so we supported one project which helped to build the energy grid. So basically the households were connected to the energy grid. And what is the result? They got an address. And then with this, having the address, they were able to also access the finance. Really like basic things, and you don't realize how much of these small things can create an impact. And these are the things that we are trying to do across the world to really like look at the value added of our investments.
Marvelous, thank you. And the African thing.
So first of all, I would just say that China is really a very interesting case to study, just to start, because it's the only country that for over 40 years has managed to grow dramatically and pass through sort of various stages, and now includes the most modern, most advanced, technologically advanced firms. So it's possible. And especially impressive that it's a big country that did it, because when a big country enters any market, the price goes down because they flood the market with so much. So they cannot take advantage of the fact that they can use the big high price because they influence the price themselves. So that part I think is important.
How come that it is possible under the extractive institutions?
Yeah, but the Chinese basically have opened up the economic sector to entrepreneurs, and the entrepreneurial spirit itself with the enabling environment, which politically was not enabling and is not, especially now, but until recently, at least economically, business-wise, it was. Now to Africa, I'm not a specialist. I used to work in Africa, but I haven't recently. But I would say there is an attempt, of course, to be technologically advanced, and one vehicle for it is the multinational corporations, because the multinational corporations take with them the same technology everywhere they go. So they basically bring the same technology to Africa as they use elsewhere in the world.
And then there are examples of indigenous progress that is dramatic. In Kenya, the use of cell phones enabled farmers to get world prices, the Chicago Board of Agriculture Exchange and so on, and sell at much better conditions because they had information that they didn't have before. And so that, plus advances in micro financing and so on, have brought to Africa progress that just wasn't there and wouldn't be there without the modern technology. But obviously, poor countries have a much harder time in this kind of global competition, so it is a huge challenge for them. And I have to apologize, I have to run. So I thank you very much, collaborators, everybody here, and please continue. Yeah.
We're almost at the end. I maybe ask Marie, the ugly Brussels, for some concluding remark about how marvelous the current cooperation between the Czech institutions and Brussels actually is.
The ugly Brussels. No. First, indeed, excellent cooperation. I think we also, the last 2 days, we were in Prague and we had very interesting meeting, very fruitful, on energy this morning, but yesterday also on long-term care, which obviously is also a very important topic to every citizen in the country. I think that, the ugly Brussels is, and how Brussels is portrayed, and there's several things we can do about it. I mean, on the one hand, actually every member state in the RRF has an obligation to communicate on the European origin of the funds, which is there. So we indeed attach a lot of importance. You were mentioning, having the logo, having the sticker. It's important indeed that, of course, us, the bureaucrats, if you want, but also in the national authorities, we communicate clearly to the population and say, look, I mean, this is indeed financed by Europe. It brings Europe closer to them. And we will have European elections very soon. So it's really important that they realize what Europe can do for them in their real life in terms of investment and reform. And I think that also the effort what we are doing, is, and it's very specific also in the RRF, there is a huge effort in terms of communication and transparency. And maybe it's not yet known enough. But if you want to follow what's going on with the RRF in every member state, okay, there is what we call the RRF scoreboard, there is an interactive map, there is a disclosure on the beneficiaries, so who gets the money from the RRF funding. So there is actually quite a lot of information out there in terms of what are in the plans in every member state, yours, but also the other ones, very concrete. You go on the website, you have a big map of Europe, you have different projects, you click, you see pictures. So I think that, in terms of communication, we're really trying to bring Europe closer to the citizen and make them aware of what we do on a daily work. Us and the team is in the room, and also the Czech colleagues working on it on a daily basis, making this materialize in concrete.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for a very fact-based panel indeed. The time is running quickly. It was a pleasure to have you here. Thank you. And I pass the word to organizers because there are some lunch instructions, right?
Yes, indeed. It is my pleasure to invite you all for a lunch, which is served right downstairs in the room where was the coffee break before. So thank you very much for great discussions, and enjoy now your break. And we will be back here at 1:25 as there will be a European chat with 12 participants and Vice President of the European Commission, Věra Jourová. So please come back here at 1:25. Thank you very much.